Chapter 474. The Divine Technique could raise the level of the practitioner. However, just like how the Divine Technique could not produce a battle form in the Green Hell realm, the Divine Technique of the Gold Core realm could not produce remarkable abilities out of nothing for the practitioner. It seemed that the so-called growth ability of the Divine Technique was only limited to the total amount of energy. Even though they did not derive any divine ability, the attacks of the few Golden Core stage experts became even fiercer as they possessed the boundless true essence that only divine ability stage experts possessed. Time and time again, their full-strength attacks were blasted out with a bang under the control of true essence at the transformative stage. They were like numerous roaring torrents that carried an unstoppable force that completely drowned all the living beings before them. Under this level of attack, even though the great Sun True Spirit that Xing Hui had transformed into could be immune to a large amount of damage, the remaining 20 to 30% was still enough to cause serious damage to the Torch Dragon Divine Body. If it were not for the fact that the Torch Dragon Divine Body could deprive the Torch Dragon Divine Body of its light perception, this round of attacks from the several Gold Core Realm experts was enough to completely destroy his Torch Dragon Divine Body. However, as the Peak Master of the Aurora Peak, Lu Xiangyang, had said, if he kept defending, he would definitely lose. Finally, after holding on for more than 20 breaths, the Torch Dragon Divine Body was finally seized by Mu Xingyi, the battle form that was so huge and solid that it was like a giant attacked with a loud bang. A terrifying power erupted on the Torch Dragon Divine Body. Even though it had transformed into the great Sun True Spirit at the first moment, the Torch Dragon Divine Body that had dimmed to only 40% was still instantly crippled. As a result, Xing Hui had no choice but to withdraw it into his body to prevent it from collapsing and dispersing. Aha, it's over. Today is the day you die. After finally dispersing Xing Hui's strange and mysterious Torch Dragon Divine Body, Mu Xingyi could not help but laugh heartily. Yes, it's over. The Torch Dragon Divine Body was defeated. Although Xing Hui's face turned slightly pale, his spirit had long become incomparably tough under the tempering of the Sword Intent and the Nine Heavens Astral Wind. Coupled with the fact that he had been tortured by the Sixth Revolution Sword Chi of the Broken Sword, even though his divine body was almost destroyed, he still managed to withstand the pain. Now your divine technique should be about done. So it's my turn. Xing Hui's gaze swept across the 16 people one by one. Among the 16 people, there were 10 whose chaos level was level 10 and above. If he was not wrong, after a few breaths of time, the time limit for those who were only level 1 divine arts should be up. Now that the warm-up is over, let the battle of life and death officially begin. As soon as Xing Hui finished speaking, the 7 blazing suns rose into the sky. Vast and mighty radiance and terrifying heat radiated from a void, quickly forming a blazing domain that covered an area of several kilometers. Great Sun Divine Palace's sect protecting immortal technique, 10 suns burning the heavens. Basically at the same time as he used the immortal technique of the 10 suns, Qing Su's golden crow physique suddenly appeared. A scorching presence radiated from the golden crow physique. However, Mu Xingyi, Cui Ji, Mu Yinglong, Du Longzi, and the others, who were still a little nervous after hearing Xing Hui's words, laughed at the same time when they saw that Xing Hui's golden crow divine body had recovered less than 80%. I thought your divine body had recovered to its peak state, but it turns out that it still hasn't recovered. Even when your golden crow divine body was at its peak, you could barely contend with us 4 Jindan stage experts. Now, there are not only 4 Jindan stage experts on our North Moon Peak, but the others are also attacking at the same time. Their battle strength is not weaker than the joint attack of 7 Jindan stage experts. I'd like to see how long you can maintain this arrogant attitude. You will see. As soon as Xing Hui finished speaking, the aura of the divine technique appeared on his body. In the next moment, the golden crow divine body that had only recovered 80% suddenly rose to its peak state. At the same time, The blazing flames emitted from the golden crow divine body also soared in power, and the terrifying heat instantly caused the surrounding several kilometers to become dry and dry. Almost at the same time that Xing Hui used the divine technique, the fusion reactor that had just formed in his body began to shrink. With almost no need to worry, a huge amount of energy was crazily poured into it, causing the light inside the reactor to burst out with a sun-like radiance. It seemed that at this moment, the fusion reactor was no longer a simple reactor, but the incarnation of a real sun. A blazing sun that continued to fuse and would never be extinguished. The so-called increase in cultivation of the divine technique was, in fact, endlessly bestowing energy to the cultivator, and could even help the cultivator complete a qualitative change in energy. And the Jindan stage required the accumulation of energy. Roar! A loud and clear chant came out from the mouth of the golden crow divine body. As the blazing sun that would never be extinguished in Xing Hui's body shrank and expanded, a terrifying torrent that was several times stronger than before gushed out from it, instantly filling the golden crow divine body. Jindan eruption. This was the true eruption of the Jindan. This was the power of the great sun Jindan eruption. With the help of this power, the flames on the golden crow divine body suddenly doubled, and then with an incredible speed, it brazenly tore down at Du Longzi, who was being treated as a bandit. As it tore out, it was as if there were countless streams of light shooting out from the void. The fierce collision and friction between the flames formed a violent lightning in the void, and the power of this strike made Du Longzi, who bore the brunt of it, turn pale. This power, this is eruption of the Jindan. This is the true eruption of the Jindan. Moreover, the power of this Jindan has definitely reached the level of the peerless rank. The power of a peerless rank Jindan. The power of a peerless rank Jindan is comparable to the power of a minor divine ability. It is definitely not something that an ordinary Jindan stage expert can block. Not good. Du Longzi, quickly retreat. Bastard, Yu Qing, how dare you try to kill a cultivator of the Hidden Sword sect? Mu Xingyi, Cui Ji, Mu Yinglong, and the others also felt the vast destructive power of this strike. For a moment, these people shouted in shock and anger at the same time, and with the fastest speed, they attacked the Golden Crow Divine Body, trying to weaken the power of the Golden Crow Divine Body and reduce the power of this strike. However, Xing Hui was determined to borrow the power of the eruption of the Jindan to destroy the prestige of the North Moon Peak, so he turned a blind eye to the roars of these Jindan stage experts. The Golden Crow Divine Body strike was like the fall of the sun, and in an instant, Du Longzi's figure was completely submerged. Die! No! Du Longzi, who couldn't dodge, roared, and the shadow of a green dragon appeared on his body, trying to block the destructive strike of the Golden Crow Divine Body. Unfortunately, it was useless. How terrifying was the power of the golden core of the Great Sun Realm. Under this strike, Du Longzi's spiritual level battle body was like a sand sculpture that was hit by a huge wave, and in an instant, it turned into ashes and disappeared on the spot. Then, the remaining power rolled down and fiercely swept past Du Longzi's body. The blazing true fire of the great sun and the destructive torrent in the Golden Crow Divine Body smashed Du Longzi, a Jindan stage expert, into pieces on the spot, and in the next moment he was burned to ashes. After killing Du Longzi, the Golden Crow Divine Body suddenly turned around, sweeping up monstrous flames and endless heat waves, and fiercely collided with the attacks of Mu Xingyi and the other Jindan stage, never-ending stage, and transformative stage experts. For a moment, an even more violent torrent of energy exploded at the center of the collision. The blazing energy compressed the surrounding air, forming a shock wave visible to the naked eye in the void. The shock wave and the air violently rubbed against each other, forming a large amount of thunder and lightning, sweeping up blazing flames and spreading in all directions. The air, clouds, and mist in the void were burned to ashes on the spot. Even those tranquil stage and transformative stage experts who wanted to attack Tsing Hui's original body, and even the three Jindan stage experts, Mu Xingyi, Mu Yinglong, and Cui Ji, were blown away by the energy shock wave mixed with the blazing torrent of thunder and lightning, flying hundreds of meters or even thousands of meters away. As for Tsing Hui, who bore the brunt of the impact, the golden crow divine body trembled violently. The powerful energy obtained by relying on the divine technique was almost completely squandered at this moment, and the radiance of the golden crow divine body, which had climbed to its peak state with great difficulty, quickly dimmed again. Du Longzi! Damn it, he killed Du Longzi? How dare he attack our Hidden Sword Sect's guest elder? Isn't he afraid that he won't be able to establish himself on the Hidden Sword continent in the future? Bastard! Yu Qing, I want you dead. The few Jindan stage experts who were sent flying by the shockwave looked at Du Longzi, who had been completely burned to ashes without leaving a corpse behind, and all of them let out angry roars. However, as they roared, Mu Yinglong and Cui Ji felt a faint chill in their hearts, and their gazes towards Tsing Hui carried a trace of fear. Assassin. Tsing Hui. He actually dared to kill them. After all, they were guest elders of the Hidden Sword Sect, and the Hidden Sword Sect was the one and only overlord of the entire Hidden Sword continent. Killing a guest elder of the Hidden Sword Sect was equivalent to provoking the entire Hidden Sword Sect. It was precisely because of this that even if the Divine Grace Trading Company had really invited a formidable Golden Core Realm expert from the Chaotic Shrine to assist them, they still dared to swarm forward. Because once they provoked the Hidden Sword Sect, they would have to face the encirclement of a few hundred Golden Core Realm experts of the entire Hidden Sword Sect. With this kind of confidence, they were not afraid of those foreign Jindan stage experts at all. But now, Tsing Hui actually dared to kill a guest elder of the Hidden Sword Sect? From today onwards, their lives would no longer be safe. Kill him, Yu Qing, you dare to kill my North Moon Peaks people. You are provoking the entire Hidden Sword Sect, and no one can save you. Kill him for me. His divine body was injured by our attack, just now. Kill him now. Don't give him any chance to breathe. The Peak Master of the North Moon Peak, Mu Xingyi, let out an exasperated roar. Mu Yinglong, Cui Ji, and the others glanced at the golden crow divine body that had indeed dimmed, and secretly nodded, suppressing the fear and chill in their hearts. However, before they could make a move, the golden crow divine body, which had dimmed a little, let out another loud cry. At the same time, 7 rays of light shot out from the 7 blazing suns in the void and poured into the golden crow divine body. With the amplification of these rays of light, the golden crow divine body, which had dimmed a little, once again erupted with a power that was not inferior to the golden core of the great sun. Blazing flames rolled and swept over, coldly glaring at the golden core stage, never-ending stage, and transformative stage experts of the North Moon Peak. Immediately, those never-ending stage, transformative stage, and even golden core stage experts who thought they could take advantage of the situation came to an abrupt halt. Do you want to challenge your own limits? See how many chapters you can release every day? Come and try. Now is the 25th, and there are 6 days until next month. In these 6 days, any Alliance leader's reward will definitely be 5 chapters per day, and it can continue. In other words, an Alliance leader will definitely release 3 chapters per day. I only have 2 chapters in my hand now, and I am saving them for the weekend. The Alliance leader's update will not conflict with the weekend release. Then, let's see how many chapters one can release in these 6 days. Chapter 475. Kill me? But just you guys, I've only killed a bandit. If all of you are still so stubborn as to associate yourselves with this bandit, then don't blame me for cleaning up the sect on behalf of the Hidden Sword Sect. I believe that even if I kill all of you in the end, and even if Hidden Sword Venerable finds out about this matter, Hidden Sword Venerable won't say anything after he understands the truth of the matter. Tsing Hui, with the power of the Golden Crow Divine Body, was completely unafraid of the siege of the North Moon Peak. Seeing that there were 6 people from the North Moon Peak whose aura had dropped due to the time limit of the divine body, he flew up again without hesitation, like a blazing sun, and charged straight at the North Moon Peak. Before the golden crow divine body arrived, a giant sword condensed under the claws of the golden crow divine body had already condensed, and a destructive aura immediately spread out. Be careful. The power of this sword is so great that a never-ending divine body can't block it at all. Tung Lu, who had suffered a great loss from this attack, hurriedly warned when he saw this scene. In fact, there was no need for his warning. Just feeling the destructive power emitted from this giant flaming sword was enough to make everyone tremble with fear. Seeing that the golden crow divine body was about to kill this sword, the leading never-ending divine body expert did not even have the courage to resist. He quickly retreated and shouted at the same time, "Peak Master, save me." "Stop right there." Mu Xingyi roared, and the aura all over his body surged. The power of his golden crow divine body soared, and then, with a terrifying power, he fiercely grabbed at Xing Hui's golden crow divine body sword. Crack the golden core. Seeing that the never-ending divine body expert was in danger of being killed by Xing Hui, Mu Xingyi chose to crack the golden core. Although he had only cracked a part of the power of the golden core, relying on the eruption of this power, he still fiercely grabbed the golden crow divine body sword that Xing Hui had killed and crushed it into pieces. Correspondingly, the power of his golden crow divine body that erupted from cracking the golden core rapidly decreased. After the decrease, not only was he unable to maintain his peak state, but his aura had also shrunk by a lot, and his vitality had already been damaged. Cracking the gold core? I like to see how many times your gold cores can withstand the cracking of your gold cores. The sword of the glorious sun was blocked, but Xing Hui's expression did not change at all. The golden crow body let out a long cry, and the mighty power once again condensed in front of him. Accompanied by the amplification of the 10-sun burning immortal technique, a sword of the glorious sun, which was only a little smaller than the previous one, was formed again. You can still, seeing the newly formed flame sword, Mu Xingyi's eyes suddenly widened. It's the 7 blazing suns. The 7 suns reabsorbed the energy dissipated by his attacks and fed it back to him. Even if the energy dissipated but couldn't be absorbed in time, the suns transformed it into a special environment that can increase his combat strength. If we can't destroy these 7 suns, he will only become stronger. Cui Ji seemed to understand something and suddenly made a move. His battle physique manifested, and with a roar, he suddenly spat out a sword light as fast as lightning, which shot toward the blazing sun in the void. However, although the blazing suns formed by the 10-sun burning immortal technique were mighty and needed the assistance of the Scarlet Sun disk, in fact, once these blazing suns were formed, they would turn into a special existence between energy and nothingness, which had a significant effect in resisting attacks. Cui Ji's thunderous attack, which even spat out his life divine weapon, only whistled through the blazing sun, pierced through it, and blew it up. According to the damage caused to the blazing sun by this attack, the time it took to destroy the blazing sun was calculated. He would have to launch similar attacks 20 or 30 times. And Xing Hui, obviously, it was impossible to give them the time to attack freely 20 or 30 times. Peak Master LV Xiangyang. This Yu Qing is obviously from another continent. Our North Moon Peak and your Aurora Peak are both members of the Hidden Sword sect. Are you going to stand aside and watch this fierce person from another continent slaughter our North Moon Peak? Seeing that they couldn't block Xing Hui's attack at all, and that they, who had reached the 2nd level of the divine art, wouldn't be able to hold on for long, Cui Ji immediately turned his gaze to the Aurora Peak that had 3 golden elixir realm experts and 6 eternal realm experts. Cui Ji's words made LV Xiangyang slightly tempted. However, before he could make a decision to deal with Xing Hui had already laughed loudly. Haha, it's fine that your North Moon Peak colluded with bandits to kill the elders of the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce. But now you want to drag in the Aurora Peak as well? My master more or less has some friendship with the hidden sword venerable. Back then, they had discussed Tao together. I didn't expect the hidden sword venerable to have been in seclusion for so many years, and so many disciples of the sect he established have actually fallen to such a state. It seems that I have to contact my master immediately after I go back and ask him to have a good talk with the hidden sword venerable about rectifying the sect's discipline. What? Your master actually knows the hidden sword venerable? LV Xiangyang, who originally wanted to make a move, suddenly changed his expression. The main reason why the hidden sword sect was so rampant now was that the hidden sword venerable had been in seclusion for hundreds of years and had not made any moves. In the past, although the hidden sword venerable would often be in seclusion, he would still show his face from time to time. However, this time he had been in seclusion for 100 years without any news. Considering the hidden sword venerable's age, everyone was guessing whether the hidden sword venerable had reached the end of his lifespan and had died in seclusion. This was also the reason why the North Moon Peak, supported by the Heavenly Tao, and the Aurora Peak, supported by the Grand Supreme, had started to continuously take over the businesses that originally belonged to the Hidden Sword sect. However, once the Hidden Sword Venerable was confirmed to be alive and had been awakened from seclusion, once the Hidden Sword Venerable knew what the Aurora Peak and the North Moon Peak had done the past 100 years, the two peaks would definitely not be able to escape the fate of being severely punished. Especially him, who was the head of the peaks, would definitely be severely punished. The main purpose of my coming here is to follow my master's orders to come to the Hidden Sword sect to explore the Myriad Sword Peak and see if I can obtain the Sword Spirit's recognition. Otherwise, why do you think I would appear in the Hidden Sword mainland? As for the matter of the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce, it was just a matter of convenience. Upon hearing Tsing Hui's words, the expressions of LV Xiangyang, Fu Yu, Zhuang Qiansheng, and the others all changed. Tsing Hui claimed that he had a master. This was most likely true. A person who could awaken the bloodlines of two mythical beasts and cultivate both bloodlines to the level of a divine-grade combat body would definitely not believe that he did not have a powerful master to guide him behind the scenes. As for his claim that he was only following his master's orders to explore the Myriad Sword Peak in the Hidden Sword mainland and obtain the Sword Spirit's recognition, this matter was also very likely to be true. After all, judging from the series of reactions of Su Xiao and the others, the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce did not know Tsing Hui's strength at all. Otherwise, if he wanted to save Jinin, why would he need to mobilize so many people and even surrender to them and almost put himself in danger? At the thought of this, LV Xiangyang, Fu Yu, Zhuang, Qiansheng, and the others already believed most of what he said. Let's go. On the side, when Mu Sheng heard that Tsing Hui actually had such a background and that it might directly alarm the Hidden Sword Venerable, he did not dare to continue fighting to the death. Of course, the main problem was that if they continued to fight, they would not have any chance of winning. In a situation where they still had enough battle power, the best choice was to retreat in time. After receiving Mu Sheng's order, Cui Ji and Mu Yinglong, who were originally a little afraid of killing without hesitation, let out a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. They leapt up and were about to lead the others away. But at this moment, Tsing Hui's voice came from behind. Go? Did I say you could go? Yuqing, what do you want to do? You should know that this place is not far from the headquarters of the Hidden Sword sect. If you really don't want to let us go, we only need to hold on and ask for help from the experts in the headquarters of the North Moon Peak. When the Grand Elder of the North Moon Peak and the young Peak Master of the North Moon Peak arrive, you will definitely not be able to escape death. Mu Sheng Yi said fiercely. Is that so? Putting aside whether I could defeat the others of the North Moon Peak or not, if I want to kill a few of you here, it won't be a problem. Then I'll kill a few of you at once. I like to see just how many people of the North Moon Peak can withstand my killing spree. Tsing Hui leapt up and directly intercepted everyone in the air. Mu Sheng Yi's heart trembled. When he thought of the great strength Tsing Hui had displayed, if he really targeted one or two of them, it really would be difficult for them to escape. For a moment, he could only shout sullenly, "Yuqing, just what do you want?" It's very simple. Xing Hui looked at Mu Sheng Yi and said coldly, "Didn't you ask the people of the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce to come and ransom them with 100 Tao rhymes? Now, your people have fallen into my hands indirectly. It would be impolite not to reciprocate. My request is not high. If your North Moon Peak leaves behind an item containing 100 Tao rhymes, I can let bygones be bygones." 100 Tao rhymes? When he heard Xing Hui's price, Mu Shengyi could not help but scream crazily. "Yuqing, are you crazy? You actually want our North Moon Peak to give you 100 Tao rhymes? Dream on. Then I have no choice but to take it myself. I remember that a Son of Chaos at rank 10 or above can be sold for 50 Taoist rhymes. Since 10 of you have utilized divine arts, it can be seen that there are 10 Sons of Chaos at rank 10 or above. I only need to capture 2 of you alive, and I'll naturally be able to force their chaos techniques out of them and exchange them for 100 Taoist rhymes." Xing Hui's gaze swept across and landed on the weakest and most powerful of the 10th level Sons of Chaos. "I'll start with you." After saying that, the golden crow phantom above his head let out a loud and clear cry. It swept up monstrous flames and charged toward that Eternal Realm expert. That Eternal Realm expert felt the mighty destructive power of Xing Hui's attack and was instantly scared out of his wits. He hurriedly shouted and retreated, "Peak Master, save me, Yuqing." Mu Shengyi let out a furious roar and was about to join forces with Cui Ji, Mu Yinglong, and the others to intercept Xing Hui. However, before they could stop Xing Hui, the golden crow above Xing Hui's head had already grabbed at the air. A round of resplendent eternity exploded. Under the amplification of the domain of the 10 burning heavens immortal technique, it formed a dazzling radiance that covered the sun, so bright that everyone could barely open their eyes. And in the instant that Mu Shengyi, Cui Ji, and the others were slightly delayed, a shrill scream rang out from the endless radiance. It was that Eternal Realm expert. When the resplendent eternity radiance dissipated, the Eternal Realm expert targeted by Xing Hui's entire body had been destroyed by Xing Hui. Moreover, Xing Hui had directly controlled the power of the Golden Crow and captured him alive. Chapter 476. First 1. Xing Hui grabbed the never-ending stage expert and poured the powerful Great Sun True Fire into the never-ending stage expert's body, causing him to scream in pain. As he screamed, flames spewed out from his ears, nose, eyes, and mouth. The true chi in his body had been completely destroyed. Then he struck the never-ending stage expert hard, knocking him unconscious, and threw him towards Su Tong and the others. "Watch him. This is 50 Taoist rhymes." After saying that, he pounced again. This time, his target was another never-ending stage expert who had a divine art. "Stop! Stop! Stop!" Seeing one of their never-ending stage experts captured by Xing Hui in an instant and unable to do anything to Xing Hui, Mu Shengyi, the peak master of the North Moon Peak, finally couldn't hold it in any longer. "I'll give you 100 Taoist rhymes. Release him immediately." He knew that he had to do so. Otherwise, the elders of the North Moon Peak, who were originally dissatisfied with the North Moon Peak's allegiance to the heavenly Tao, would definitely be dissatisfied. At that time, the North Moon Peak would be unable to rise again and would no longer be able to compete with the Aurora Peak and the Hidden Sword Peak. "I'll give you the Taoist rhymes you want." "Oh." Xing Hui's hand movements paused slightly as his gaze fell on Mu Shengyi. "Where's the Taoist rhymes item?" "You have to release him first before I give you the Taoist rhymes item." "Huh. You want me to release him without seeing the Taoist rhymes item?" Mu Shengyi saw Xing Hui sneer and immediately said angrily, "Don't forget that Jin Yin of the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce is still in my hands." Hearing Mu Shengyi's words, Su Xiao suddenly stepped forward and said sternly, "Mu Shengyi, you've finally admitted that you're the one who ordered Du Longzi to capture Elder Jin Yin of the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce? Release Senior Elder Jin Yin immediately. Otherwise, I will definitely use the channels of my Divine Grace Merchant Guild to spread the news to everyone. I will let the entire Hidden Sword sect, and even the entire Hidden Sword continent, know that your North Moon Peak killed their own sect's senior elder. Oh, if you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten. You even captured Elder Jean from the Divine Grace Merchant Guild. Where is she? Let him go. Sing Hui chimed in. You, Mu Shengyi said in a deep voice, will hand Doyan Jeanine over to you, but you'll have to reduce the Tao rhythm you requested by half. Do you think this is a negotiation? Cut it in half. I can't be bothered with Senior Elder Jean life or death. If you really have the ability, you could just kill her directly. At most, I'll get the people of the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce to prepare a shadow stone and spread the scene of you killing Senior Elder Jean throughout the entire Hidden Sword sect. I'll let the people of the Hidden Sword sect understand the methods of your North Moon Peak to kill your fellow sect members. As for the 100 Taoist rhymes that you should hand over, it can't be less. Yuqing, don't go too far. Mu Shengyi furiously shouted. So what if I bully you? Could it be that your North Moon Peak's various methods against the Divine Grace Merchant Guild can be considered as frequent courtesy? Sing Hui coldly replied. Seeing that Sing Hui had angered the people of the North Moon Peak endlessly, the Divine Grace Merchant Guild was somewhat dissatisfied with him for not caring about Senior Elder Jean's life, but they still felt a sense of relief in their hearts. For so many years, the Divine Grace Merchant Guild had been suppressed by the North Moon Peak, and it was almost impossible for them to breathe. On average, the North Moon Peak would pressure the Divine Grace Merchant Guild more every month, causing the people of the Divine Grace Merchant Guild to be filled with grievances. However, today it was finally their turn to force the North Moon Peak's Peak Master, Sing Hui, into silence. Even if this kind of coercion was brought on by Sing Hui, who was not a member of the Divine Grace Merchant Guild, it still made them feel a sense of pride. I don't want to talk too much nonsense with you. Either hand over the Taoist item, or I'll do it myself. In any case, as long as I capture one of you and force him to hand over the Primal Chaos incantation, the 100 Taoist rhymes will be in my hands. Why wouldn't I do it? Sing Hui coldly snorted. This guy's way of doing things will bring about a disaster sooner or later. Seeing Sing Hui's aggressive attitude towards the North Moon Peak, Lu Xiangyang, the Peak Master of the Aurora Peak, felt an inexplicable sense of displeasure. Oh, so what if he can take back the 100 Taoist rhymes treasure? Don't forget, the strongest person in the North Moon Peak is not Mu Shengyi and the others, but the Great Elder who has joined the Way of Heaven and has received strong support from the Way of Heaven. It is said that the Great Elder has cultivated a superior grade gold core, and he has many magic weapons. Coupled with the enhancement of his chaotic level, his strength is not much inferior to Yu Qing's. As long as there are one or two experts of the Gold Core realm, it will be easy to defeat him. At that time, wouldn't the North Moon Peak have to obediently hand over all the Taoist rhymes treasures? Not only would they have to hand over all the treasures, but they might also lose many of their treasures. After all, he is not a member of the Hidden Sword sect, so the people of the North Moon Peak don't have to worry as much about him as they do about the Divine Grace Merchant Guild. MOU sneered. That's not necessarily true. This guy's background is also very shocking. What if he brings out his master? Zhuang Qiansheng interrupted. Master? He has a backer, but doesn't the North Moon Peak have one as well? In addition to the Great Elder, the North Moon Peak also has a young Peak Master, Bei Yuxian. Bei Yuxian is the disciple of Sect Master Qi Xian, one of the 36 Taoists of the Way of Heaven. Although Sect Master Qi Xian took him in partly because he liked Bei Yuxian's cultivation talent, the main reason was to rope in the North Moon Peak so that he could intervene in the affairs of the Hidden Sword sect. Once a powerful outsider dares to stir up trouble and ruin Sect Master Qi Xian's plan, do you think Sect Master Qi Xian will be willing to let it go? No matter how powerful Yu Qing's background is, it can't be more powerful than the Sect Master of the Way of Heaven. MOU's words made Zhuang Qiansheng open his mouth, but he didn't know how to refute. After a long while, he said nothing, which was a tacit agreement. I'll give you the 100 Taoist rhymes treasures. I only hope that you can hold on to these 100 Taoist rhymes treasures. Just as Mo you had guessed, Mu Xingyi forcibly swallowed his anger. With a flip of his hand, he had already taken out dozens of Taoist rhymes treasures from his personal space. Seeing those Taoist rhymes treasures, Xing Lian of the Shunhui Chamber of Commerce couldn't help but curse. Damn it! More than half of these Taoist rhymes treasures belong to our Hidden Sword sect's resource points. We need to turn them over to the main sect. The main sect will keep 10% and give Hidden Sword Venerable 50%. The remaining 40% will be evenly distributed to the other 36 peaks. But in fact, the distribution of Taoist rhymes treasures to the other peaks has decreased by more than 10 times compared to 100 years ago. Some of the smaller peaks haven't received any Taoist rhymes treasures for decades. Obviously, they've all fallen into the North Moon Peak's pockets. They're so blatantly pocketing the Taoist rhymes treasures. The North Moon Peak and the Aurora Peak should provide the Hidden Sword Peak with the same amount of Tao-carrying items every year. In fact, it has even increased compared to before. In addition, the North Moon Peak, the Aurora Peak, and the other peaks have settled down a few other large peaks that have Golden Elixir Realm experts guarding them. Who would care about the survival of the remaining small peaks? Su Xiao said coldly. I'd like to see how Hidden Sword Venerable will deal with Hidden Sword Venerable when he comes out of seclusion and sees that the entire Hidden Sword Peak is in such a mess because of them. Su Tong glanced at Su Xiao. In fact, she more or less knew why the North Moon Peak and Aurora Peak were so fearless. Firstly, it was rumored that Hidden Sword Venerable had already died of old age in seclusion. Secondly, even if Hidden Sword Venerable really wanted to get rid of them, the two peaks were backed by the Peak Chaos Organization's Heavenly Tao and Grand Supreme. Hidden Sword Venerable might not dare to fall out with them and kill the top executives of the two sections. This was the difference between having a background and not having one. Very good. At least you know what's good for you. As for whether I can keep these Taoist rhymes treasures for 100 years, that's not something you need to consider. Xing Hui directly put the Taoist rhymes treasures into his personal space and then made a gesture to Su Xiao. Su Xiao naturally released her control over the Eternal Expert. Immediately, a never-ending realm expert rushed over and quickly brought him back to the North Moon Peaks team. Jean Yin is in that courtyard. You know if you go and check it out yourselves. Let's go, Mu Xingyi said with a black face. Then, he waved his hand and quickly left with the North Moon Peak team. He didn't want to stay on this peak for a second longer. This time, not only did he lose Du Longzi, the golden core expert he had roped in, but he also lost 100 Taoist rhymes. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he had suffered a double loss. Therefore, he definitely wouldn't let this matter go easily. Xing Hui naturally understood this point. However, he wasn't afraid. If not for the fact that he wasn't from the Hidden Sword sect and might cause Hidden Sword Venerable to be displeased by killing the Hidden Sword Venerable, he didn't intend to let any of the people from the North Moon Peak off. 10 rank 10 Sons of Chaos. That was an income of 500 Taoist rhymes. Although it was impossible for him to capture all of these Sons of Chaos alive during the battle, and sometimes he couldn't control his strength and accidentally killed them, even half of them were equivalent to 250 Taoist rhymes. Where else could he find such a bountiful harvest? It was no wonder that even in the Infinite Region, there were many organizations that specialized in hunting Sons of Chaos. Although this trip was extremely dangerous, the benefits were far beyond that of an ordinary sea-crossing merchant association. Let's go. Seeing that the people from the North Moon Peak had left, the people from the Aurora Peak didn't dare to stay any longer. They were afraid that Xing Hui would turn around and extort them again. At this moment, Xing Lian also rushed into Du Longzi's courtyard and rescued Elder Jean Yin, who was unconscious. Phew! Seeing that Elder Jean Yin was safe and sound, the people from the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce heaved a sigh of relief. On the other hand, Su Xiao stepped forward and bowed deeply to Xing Hui. Lord Yuqing, the entire Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce thanks Lord Yuqing for your help. It's all right. I saved all of you entirely for the sake of my disciple, Su Yuan. However, this is the only time. Hearing that, Su Xiao thought of the request that Xing Hui had made previously. She immediately gritted her teeth and said, Lord Yuqing, if you can really help the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce solve the current problem and get through the crisis, we are willing to offer you all the Taoist items that contain more than 200 Taoist rhymes that we have accumulated over the years. I don't feel that everyone is very enthusiastic, but no matter what, there will still be an explosion over the weekend. Today is already Thursday, so I'm looking for a round of recommendation tickets to warm up. Chapter 477. Oh! Xing Hui's gaze fell on Su Xiao. It seemed that the president of the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce had finally understood. Very good. I will take this matter to heart. Currently, with me overseeing your Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce, before they truly understand my background, even if the people of the North Moon Peak want to take revenge for Du Longzi, they won't dare to act rashly. And during this period of time, our opportunity lies. Yes, Su Xiao responded, and then asked with a hint of probing, Lord Yuqing, I wonder if you can ask the senior master behind you to help? If that senior helps, the threat of the North Moon Peak is certainly not worth mentioning. Xing Hui glanced at Su Xiao. Is there a need to ask such a question? If those powerful beings were really willing to help the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce, they would have already done so. Although the Hidden Sword Continent is not far from the Heaven Wasteland domain, the forces of the Hidden Sword Continent are not comparable to that of other continents. There are dozens of experts of the Golden Core realm, and even if the North Moon Peak and Aurora Peak are added together, there are more than 10 experts of the Golden Core realm. With such a lineup, unless the powerful beings who want to send down their incarnations have a remarkable ability seed, there is no possibility of a comeback. And if they carry a remarkable ability seed, once they are targeted, they will pay the price of death. Do you think that 200 Tao rhythms is enough for a powerful being to risk his life to help the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce solve the problem? This, Su Xiao was momentarily unable to answer. 200 Tao rhythms was indeed enough for a powerful being to take a risk, but this so-called risk also depended on the degree of danger. If there was only a certain level of danger, then the powerful being might not necessarily not take the risk, but if the level of danger was so high that there was a 90% chance of survival, other than a fool, no one would gamble their life for 200 Tao rhythms. In addition to the danger, after obtaining your 200 Tao rhythms, the revenge from the heavenly Tao is also a problem. After all, behind the Aurora Peak and North Moon Peak are the heavenly Tao and supreme of the 10 great organizations of chaos. Under various factors, the benefits of 200 Tao rhythms is simply not enough for any powerful being to take such a risk. I understand. Su Xiao's face revealed a hint of bitterness. Then what method does Mr. Yuqing plan to use to help the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce get through the current crisis? Seeing that Su Xiao was depressed, Su Tong hurriedly asked, As for the method, I have already thought of one. In fact, the main reason why the Hidden Sword Sect is in such a situation is because of the inaction of the Hidden Sword Peak and the rumor of the death of the Hidden Sword Venerable. If the Hidden Sword Peak is willing to stand out and maintain order, even if the North Moon Peak and the Aurora Peak have the support of the Grand Supreme and the Way of Heaven, they would not be so arrogant. However, if the Hidden Sword Venerable is not dead and can appear once, the arrogance of the Aurora Peak and the North Moon Peak will definitely be completely suppressed in the face of a continent with a powerful person. If the Hidden Sword Venerable is determined enough, he can completely disregard the secret influence of the Grand Supreme and the Way of Heaven and completely disintegrate the Aurora Peak and the North Moon Peak. Venerable Hidden Sword. Su Tong's eyes immediately lit up when she heard Qing Su mention the Hidden Sword Venerable. It's impossible for the Hidden Sword Venerable to die so easily. According to what I know, 1,000 years ago, when the Hidden Sword Venerable showed signs of age, he paid a great price to purchase a few heavenly resources that could extend his lifespan, including the extremely valuable unfalling flower and the fruit of eternal life, which is even more valuable. Even if golden core experts only have a lifespan of 2,000 years, the effects of the unfalling flower and the fruit of eternal life would still be sufficient for the hidden sword venerable to live to 3,000 or 4,000 years old. Moreover, according to our observations, the hidden sword venerable has fought against others in the past 1,000 years or so, but he hasn't suffered any heavy injuries to his foundation. His lifespan shouldn't be affected by that much either. Oh, Sing Hui nodded slightly. This was probably the reason why the North Moon Peak and the Aurora Peak were able to restrain each other. Otherwise, the two major forces would have lost their patience long ago if there had been no movement for 100 years. Mr. Yuqing, doesn't your master have a good relationship with the Hidden Sword Venerable? If your master is able to invite the Hidden Sword Honorable out, all of the problems that our Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce is currently facing will be easily solved. Once the problems of our Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce are solved, I believe that Miss will definitely not be stingy with the 200 Taoist rhymes that she should pay you. Su Tong was full of anticipation. Su Xiao, Si Tong Jun, and the rest looked at Sing Hui, waiting for his response. Sing Hui shook his head. If I could use this method, I would have used it long ago. 200 Taoist rhymes is definitely a huge benefit for me. It's a pity. My master has contacted the Hidden Sword Venerable, but he did not reply. I came to the Hidden Sword mainland under the orders of my master. On one hand, I want to explore the Hidden Sword Venerable in the Hidden Sword mainland. On the other hand, I want to visit the Hidden Sword Venerable on behalf of my master to see if he is all right. He has already used it. Su Zhao's eyes flashed with deep disappointment. Currently, the best method that I can think of is to explore the Myriad Sword Peak. If I can attract the Myriad Sword Chime on the Myriad Sword Peak, I will be able to get the attention of the Hidden Sword Venerable. If the Hidden Sword Venerable is still fine, I will be able to get the attention of the Hidden Sword Venerable. Explore the Myriad Sword Peak. Su Xiao bitterly smiled. It's no use. We've already thought of this method. Over the past 2 years, we've secretly recruited some of the most famous sword geniuses in the continent and invited them to the Myriad Sword Peak. We've tried to use the Myriad Sword Chime to attract the attention of the Hidden Sword Venerable. Unfortunately, the Myriad Sword Peak seems to have been neglected for a long time. It's almost useless. Not to mention defeating the sword spirits and gaining their recognition. There aren't many people who can even attract the sword spirits to show themselves. In fact, in the past 100 years, the most talented person has only gained the recognition of 12 sword spirits. It's not even close to the Myriad Sword Chime. The recognition of 12 sword spirits, Sing Hui frowned. He did not expect that the difficulty of exploring the Myriad Sword Peak would be so high, even though the Myriad Sword Chime was only an imaginary number now. And it was hard to say if there were even 100 divine weapons with sword spirits in the entire Myriad Sword Peak. Even if there were only half of 100 divine weapons, there would still be 50 of them. The difference between 50 and 12 was more than 4 times. Although the hope is slim, we still have to try. Sing Hui said. Su Tong, Su Xiao, and the others saw that there was no other way and could only nod. At least now, they had Sing Hui in the Shun Hui Chamber of Commerce, whose battle strength was not inferior to that of an upper-grade golden core cultivator. Compared to the previous situation where they could not even guarantee their safety, it was much better. In a month, I will explore the Myriad Sword Peak. During this month, you will try to find a way to collect the top sword manuals of the Hidden Sword Sect for me to learn and strengthen my own swordsmanship foundation. A month? Isn't it a bit too rushed? Su Tong said hesitantly. It can only be a month. If it is too long, there will be changes. Sing Hui said. In fact, the changes he mentioned did not only include the North Moon Peak, but also the Way of Heaven. One had to know that Broken Sword already knew about his chaos level. The reason why Broken Sword did not leak it out was because it wanted to monopolize his chaos incantation. As an almighty who had a level 11 flying sword, if Broken Sword did not care about the exhaustion and flew at full speed day and night, it would not be an extravagant hope to fly 200,000 kilometers in a day. Based on this calculation, Broken Sword Continent which was less than 20 million kilometers away from the eastern wilderness, would only need 100 days to cross. What if Savage Sword found out about his whereabouts, and he secretly rushed over? Once they met, it would definitely be a huge problem. He could not guarantee that he could always use the backtrack skill. All right then, we will use the power of the Hunyuan Chamber of Commerce and collect all the sword manuals we can from Mr. Yu Qing in this month. Okay, Xing Hui agreed. Soon, the group set off again and returned to the Hunyuan Chamber of Commerce. When they arrived at the Hunyuan Chamber of Commerce, Su Xiao did not waste any time and used all the power of the Hunyuan Chamber of Commerce to collect sword manuals. The sword manuals that could catch the eye of the Hunyuan Chamber of Commerce were all extraordinary. The worst of them contained sword moves that could be used by true energy realm experts. In just 3 days, the number of sword manuals in Xing Hui's cultivation room had reached 100. This was after Su Xiao, Su Tong, and the others considered that Xing Hui's time was limited and removed the ordinary sword manuals that were not famous. Otherwise, the number of true energy realm sword manuals in front of Xing Hui would be more than 3 times. These sword manuals, Xing Hui spent 10 days and read through all the sword manuals. In the end, he frowned. Among the sword manuals, the sword moves in the true energy realm, spirit refining realm, spirit uniting realm, and green hell realm were better. However, at the prominent divine realm, the sword moves were obviously less effective. It was as if they existed solely to rely on the battle physique. At the true energy realm, transformative realm, and even never-ending realm, this feature was even more obvious. As for the golden core realm, among the 6 golden core realm sword manuals that he read, the strongest killing move of any sword manual was not as powerful as an attack that relied on the battle physique of the golden core realm. At best, it was comparable to the battle physique's talent. These sword manuals were of little value. They were tasteless, but a pity to throw away. Many of the sword manuals are inferior to the Wuji Sword Sect's killing sword manual in terms of concept and profoundness. The only advantage they have is that the inheritance of the lifeless sword manual isn't complete, and these sword manuals can be used by Golden Core Realm experts. Xing Hui put down another Golden Core Realm sword manual and sighed in his heart. All the sword moves and killing moves were accessories to the battle physique. They were created to better unleash the power of the battle physique. Rather than calling them sword manuals, they were more like supplements to the battle physique's talent techniques. After all, using innate skills consumed too much energy. It was impossible for cultivators to use their strongest innate skills to attack all the time. At this time, the sword moves derived from the sword manual could come in handy. Not only could it reduce the energy consumption, but it could also create an attack effect that was only inferior to innate skills. However, the sword manuals, they were far from the sword manuals and sword manuals that Xing Hui had in mind. This is indeed a world where the battle physique is paramount. The battle physique first, then the divine abilities, and finally, the law phenomenon. Then, the domain, shattering the vacuum, and turning into a real divine beast or sacred beast. That's the most powerful path. The other cultivation methods, such as alchemy, arrays, sword arts, spirit refinement, beast taming, and so on, are just supplements to the battle physique and divine abilities. Xing Hui heaved a sigh. On Earth, he loved the sword, practiced it, learned it, and understood it. However, this was not a world for swordsmen after all. Chapter 478. Good swordsmanship, practice swordsmanship, seek swordsmanship, practice swordsmanship, comprehend swordsmanship. But in the end, this can't be the reason or excuse for me to switch to swordsmanship. A person can't give up his life for his hobbies. Just like a painter, if he can't even afford his basic living expenses, how can he devote his energy and effort to painting? No matter how fanatical his hobby is, he can only choose to face reality and solve his basic living problems first. This world is the same. The strong are respected, and danger lurks everywhere. Practicing swordsmanship can't give me powerful combat strength. It's the foundation of survival in this world, and it can't allow me to return to Earth as soon as possible to reunite with my family and friends. The only choice I have is to give up swordsmanship. Sing Hui slowly put down the sword manual in his hand, an indescribable sense of loneliness and emptiness in his eyes. Sword Saint Sing Hui. Perhaps I can't be called a true swordsman at all. The moment he put down the sword manual, a large chunk of his essence, energy, and spirit seemed to be stripped away from him, and the light in his eyes dimmed. He felt a sense of loss. It was as if something important had been dug out of his heart. It was completely empty, making that place feel incomparably cold and empty. But so what if his willpower was low? He still had to continue walking down the path. Low willpower couldn't be the reason or excuse for him to exile himself and abandon himself to depravity. Humans had to face reality in the end. Enduring the emptiness and loneliness, Sing Hui focused his attention on the Son of Chaos interface in the Chaos Temple. Battle physique, divine abilities, domains, divinity, and even a world with a thought were the strongest cultivation paths in this world. Naturally, he needed to devote more energy to this cultivation system. But before that, preserving his life was the most important thing. Sing Hui glanced at the newly acquired 100-year-old Dao item, then at the accumulated Dao aura in the Fortune Jade. It was time to cultivate the supreme immortal technique, yin-yang reversal, to great success and completely resolve the crisis brought about by the sword wielder. A month passed quickly. When the appointed time arrived, Su Tong, Su Xiao, and the others waited outside Sing Hui's courtyard early in the morning. Whether or not the divine grace chamber of commerce could be resolved once and for all depended on this moment. Although Su Tong, Su Xiao, Xing Lian, Si Tongzhen, and the healed elder Jin Yin didn't have high hopes for Sing Hui's trip to the Myriad Sword Peak this time, to the divine grace chamber of commerce in crisis. Any hope, no matter how small it was, had to be firmly grasped with all their might. Strength. The Myriad Swords Peak was located in the southeast corner of the Hidden Sword Sect. It was about 300 kilometers away from the Hidden Sword Peak, which was the core area of the Hidden Sword Sect. It was neither the core area of the Hidden Sword Sect nor the border area of the Hidden Sword Sect. The sect had always had a rule that any cultivator could become a disciple of the sect, as long as they could enter the Myriad Sword Peak and obtain the recognition of one sword spirit. If they could obtain the recognition of more than 10 sword spirits, they could directly become a true disciple of the sect. If they could obtain the recognition of 100 sword spirits, they could become the sect leader's personal disciple. If they could cause the 10,000 sword chime, the sword Venerable Hidden Sword would personally take them in and make them the next sect leader. As the number of sword spirits in the Myriad Sword Peak dwindled, the sword spirits that could not lose their spirituality after such a long time were all outstanding sword spirits. Although they did not have the supreme divine power they had in their heyday, it was getting more and more difficult to obtain the recognition of these arrogant sword spirits. The 10,000 sword chime had also become a saying. Currently, the so-called 10,000 sword chime had been compressed time and time again. It was now to the point where the sword Venerable Hidden Sword would personally take them in as a disciple and make them the next sect leader of the Hidden Sword sect. Even so, in recent years, the person with the best results had only obtained the recognition of 12 sword spirits at the same time. It was almost 10 times worse than 100 sword chime. They're here. They're here. The people from the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce are here. As soon as the group of people from Qing Su set foot in the vicinity of the Myriad Swords Peak, countless figures immediately appeared around the peak. They pointed at Qing Su and the group of people from the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce. That's the expert who killed Du Longzi of the North Moon Peak. His bearing is indeed extraordinary. I heard that the great elder of the North Moon Peak wanted to kill him personally. However, considering that he was about to break into the Myriad Sword Peak, he wanted to see if he was a real talent before making a decision. If he was a top talent for the future development of the Hidden Sword sect, the great elder of the North Moon Peak could choose to turn hostility into friendship. However, if he was just a facade, what awaited him would be a thunderous strike. The sword spirits in the myriad sword peak don't have much ability, but they all talk big. It's difficult to obtain the recognition of these sword spirits. It's even harder to obtain the recognition of all the sword spirits at the same time. It seems that even the ancestor of our hidden sword sect, the hidden sword venerable, could only cause the 36 spiritual swords to vibrate at the same time. All kinds of discussions could be heard from the crowd. As Tsing Hui and the others stepped onto the myriad sword peak, more and more cultivators from the hidden sword sect heard the commotion and rushed over, looking like they wanted to join in the fun. Mr. Yu Qing, the myriad sword peak is right in front of us. Su Xiao led the way in front, and at the same time, looked at a mountain peak that was not very tall. Although this mountain peak did not look very tall, the entire mountain peak was mainly brown, like a piece of black iron ore. On top of it, there were many divine swords of different shapes and sizes. The number of swords was densely packed, and at a glance, there were no less than a few million swords. In the ancient books of the Hidden Sword sect, there seems to be a record that the cornerstone of the myriad sword peak has a mysterious power. If a divine sword is inserted into the peak, over time, the divine sword will breed a sword spirit. Therefore, all the swords that were no longer used or were unnecessary in the hidden sword sect were all moved to the myriad sword peak and inserted into it. Over time, over 1,000 years, the myriad sword peak has accumulated more than 300 swords. Su Xiao noticed that Tsing Hui was sizing up the many swords on the myriad sword peak and hurriedly explained. At the end, he added, "But it turns out that this is obviously just a rumor. If the myriad sword peak really has the characteristic of breeding divine swords and giving birth to a sword spirit, the spiritual swords on the myriad sword peak would not have become ordinary swords with the passage of time." Tsing Hui looked at the myriad sword peak in front of him and could not help but think of the myriad sword peak in the Lorraine kingdom of the eastern wilderness. There is also a peerless divine sword in the myriad sword peak, and that divine sword was heavily sealed and trapped in a rock. No one knew how many years had passed, and no one had discovered it. The myriad sword peak in front of him was many times larger than the stone pillar that the broken sword in the ancestral land of the myriad sword peak had originally been. In addition, there was a rumor that it seemed to breed a sword spirit. Inside, could it be a peerless divine sword? Could it be the legendary imperial demon refining sword? Just as Tsing Hui was pondering, a sharp gaze swept towards Tsing Hui. Just by looking at it, Tsing Hui could faintly feel an oppressive aura. As Qing Su followed the light, his gaze landed on an old man very soon. Hidden Sword Master only accepted him as a disciple after he became a powerful figure. Due to his overflowing talent, Hidden Sword Master named him North Divine Powers, which means that he has the potential to reach the Divine Powers realm. In fact, the talent that he has shown is worthy of the title of Divine Powers. He is not even 1,000 years old, but he has already condensed a superior-grade gold core. It is said that after receiving many benefits from the way of heaven, his superior-grade gold core has been perfected. Next, he can choose to continue cultivating and condense a peerless gold core, or give a shot and try to breed a Divine Powers. Su Xiao noticed Tsing Hui's gaze and immediately introduced him in a low voice with a hint of reverence in his tone. At present, he is the most powerful figure in Hidden Sword Sect. Even the Grand Elder of Hidden Sword Peak, who has the 12th level divine weapon, 8 Desolation Demon Vanquishing Sword, may not be able to beat him. More than half of the reason why North Moon Peak can develop to such a scale is because of Grand Elder North Divine Powers. Perfected superior-grade gold core. Tsing Hui looked at North Divine Powers. No wonder he could give him such a strong sense of oppression. If Tsing Hui did not use the 10 Burning Heavens immortal technique, he may not be able to fight against such a powerful figure. If the other party's chaotic level was high enough and had recovery characteristics above the 10th level, Tsing Hui might even be at a disadvantage. The people from Aurora Peak and Hidden Sword Peak are also here. When Su Xiao introduced North Divine Powers to Tsing Hui, Su Tong reminded him in a low voice. Sing Hui glanced around and saw that there were more than 10 gold core realm experts at the foot of Myriad Swords Peak. Although they represented different forces, it also proved the strength of the Hidden Sword Sect, the supreme ruler of the Hidden Sword Continent. Anyone can enter Myriad Swords Peak as long as they abide by the rules. Even the sect leader is not qualified to stop them. However, before entering Myriad Swords Peak, you have to register with the 2 peak guarding elders. Su Xiao said with a smile. Okay, Sing Hui said, and came to the foot of Myriad Swords Peak. The 10,000 Swords Peak was no more than 1,000 meters tall. It was mainly brown and black, like a giant meteorite that fell from the sky. There was not a single blade of grass growing on the peak, and there was no living creature. It was full of loneliness and desolation. Apart from the countless sharp swords, there was nothing else. Fortunately, because the Hidden Sword Sect had people who entered Myriad Swords Peak all year round, there was still a path on the peak. One of the 2 peak guarding elders lived in a thatched cottage in front of the path. At this moment, the peak guarding elder obviously knew that Sing Hui was going to enter the mountain. He walked out of the thatched cottage and sought Sing Hui. He said in a deep voice, "When you enter the mountain, you must remember that your cultivation cannot exceed the true Qi realm. Once you exceed the true Qi realm, although you can defeat the sword spirit, you will not be able to gain the sword spirit's recognition. Even if you reach the peak, it will be meaningless. Furthermore, when we find that you have used your true Qi realm cultivation, we will invite you down the mountain." "I can't use my true Qi realm cultivation." Sing Hui listened and nodded. "There are many treasured swords on the mountain, but you still have to sense which one is a spiritual sword and which one is an ordinary sword. If you can't even find a spiritual sword, you're not qualified to enter the mountain. Furthermore, after you find a spiritual sword and awaken the sword spirit in it, it is best to maintain your awakening realm cultivation and fight with the sword spirit. Otherwise, even if you defeat the sword spirits with your true Qi, the chances of gaining their recognition will not be more than 30%. However, the specifics will still depend on your own swordsmanship." "I understand. Please." The peak guarding elder gestured to Sing Hui with his hand. Immediately, Sing Hui stepped forward and directly stepped onto Myriad Swords Peak. For new chapters today, please recommend me. Chapter 479. Antong, Mr. Yu Qing. Can you do it? At the foot of the mountain, Su Xiao looked at Qing, who had set foot on the mountain, with a sliver of worry. Su Tong hesitated for a moment and said, "Mr. Yu Qing's teacher is acquainted with the Hidden Sword Venerable. He even went to the Wanjian Peak in the past. Since he sent his disciple here, he must have some confidence. Otherwise, why would he send Mr. Yu Qing across the sea to come here? Let's have some confidence in Mr. Yu Qing. Is that so? That's great. If Mr. Yu Qing can really trigger the resonance of 10,000 swords. No, he doesn't need to trigger the resonance of 10,000 swords. This rule was changed more than 200 years ago. As long as Mr. Yu Qing can trigger the resonance of 100 swords, he will definitely be able to alert the Hidden Sword Honorable. At that time, he will tell the Hidden Sword Honorable about the current situation that our Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce is in. The Hidden Sword Honorable will definitely not turn a blind eye." Su Xiao said happily. Su Tong nodded as well. However, she was not very optimistic. Resonance of 100 swords? Over the years, how many experts who claimed to be sword geniuses had come to the Wanjian Peak? But in the end, even the best one was only recognized by 12 sword spirits, which was 10 times worse than the resonance of 100 swords. Mr. Yu Qing might be overflowing with talent, but judging from his attacking methods, he was obviously not a sword cultivator. Even in the Hidden Sword Continent, where the sword was always respected, there was no one who could cause 100 swords to chant at the same time. Then, how could a person who came from outside the Hidden Sword Continent and majored in the battle physique get the recognition of 100 sword spirits at the same time, which was also the recognition of all the spirit swords on the Myriad Sword Peak? Moreover, once Sing Hui showed that he could trigger the resonance of 100 swords, the Golden Elixir Realm experts on the Aurora Peak and North Moon Peak would definitely interfere. After all, they were the ones who were most afraid of Hidden Sword Supreme. Sing Hui did not know that his arrival on the Wanjian Peak had stirred up everyone's thoughts. The moment he stepped on the Wanjian Peak, he immediately felt that the peak was unusual. Sword essence. In this mountain, his sword intent seemed to have been magnified by a magnifying glass. His original 10% sword intent could almost display 30% of its power. It allows a cultivator's sword intent power to increase by almost 3 times compared to before. Mental strength is different from other attributes. Increasing one's attack level by 10 might bring about a difference of several times, but increasing one's mental strength by 10 levels is the limit. This is also the reason why, even without the help of secret techniques, a cultivator with a mental strength level of 60, or even a cultivator with a mental strength level of 90, can withstand the mental attacks of a cultivator with a mental strength level of 90. This 3 times increase is almost equivalent to raising my mental strength level from less than 100 to 120, or even 130. Sing Hui was secretly surprised. This Myriad Swords peak really did have some tricks up its sleeves. No wonder there was a rumor that this peak could give birth to a sword spirit. There was no smoke without fire. Sing Hui slowly walked on the mountain path of Myriad Swords Peak with the help of his sword intent that had been stimulated several times. He carefully sensed the sword intents emitted by the many divine weapons on both sides of the mountain path. Compared to cultivators who were in the dark, he, whose sword intent was close to perfection, had a unique advantage in sensing spiritual swords. Even if he had converged the vast and majestic vital essence in his body when he set foot on the 10,000 Swords Peak, and even condensed the Golden Crow's divine soul and the Torch Dragon's divine soul in his spiritual world into a single point, forcefully compressing his cultivation base to below the awakening realm, he could still clearly determine which divine weapon contained a strong sword intent and which one contained a weak sword intent. Relying on this feeling, Sing Hui searched for a moment on the mountain path and quickly sensed the location of a spirit sword. Buzz buzz! Standing in front of the spirit sword, Sing Hui's sword intent burst out from his spiritual world, as if it had turned into an invisible sword and slashed into the spirit sword. As the spirit sword shook slightly, a stream of light burst out from the spirit sword, and soon an elegant and otherworldly man appeared. The man's figure looked a little weak, but his aura was still fluctuating. He was not weaker than an expert in the awakening realm, and there was even a faint trend of him approaching the true energy realm. Moreover, as his figure appeared, he waved his hand, and the spirit sword immediately fell into his hand. With the sword in hand, the elegant and otherworldly aura on his body suddenly changed, becoming cold and sharp. Sing Hui, who had compressed his vital essence and soul, felt a faint pain on his face when the sword was pointed at him. The strength of this deterrence had already exceeded that of an ordinary true energy realm cultivator. So you're the one who awakened my spirituality. The sword spirit held the spirit's sword and muttered. Then he seemed to look at his body again, and a trace of vicissitude and loneliness flashed in his eyes. I thought I would never wake up again. So, I still exist. Sing Hui stared at the sword spirit in front of him, his expression grave. The mountain guarding elder's words were still in his ears. When dealing with sword spirits, one could not use cultivation beyond the true energy realm. Violators would be personally asked to leave the mountain by the mountain guarding elder. However, the piercingly cold and sharp aura emitted from the sword spirit in front of him. How could he win without using cultivation above the true energy realm? My name is Tung Shua. The man slowly came back to his senses and held the spirit's sword in his hand horizontally. Experience, sir. Use your way of the sword to defeat me. Let me know that a true swordsman still exists in this world. Way of the sword. Hearing the man's words, Sing Hui's heart skipped a beat, as if he had vaguely thought of something. However, at this time, the man named Tung Shua in front of him did not give him any more time. He brazenly attacked and stabbed out with his sword. This sword was only equivalent to the strength of an awakening realm cultivator. However, the moment this sword was stabbed out, Tsing felt that his vision was completely filled with the sword light of this sword. It was a kind of indescribable brilliance. It was also a kind of brilliance that could not be described with words. Ching Su saw a charm in the strike, a charm that made his mind sink into it. It was just like how, if a person was painting quietly in a garden and the autumn wind rustled in, when outsiders stepped into the garden, they would be attracted by the concept in the painting. They would also slow down unknowingly, afraid that their footsteps would disturb the tranquility and beauty. The sword that Tang Shua had stabbed out was the same. That kind of concentration, that kind of naturalness, made him feel as if his mind was seized by the sword light of this sword, and he was immersed in the sword's elegance. After a while, the sword intent roared. The shock formed by the collision of the two sword intents caused Tsing Hui to quickly wake up. At this time, he seemed to have thought that he was fighting with this sword spirit in swordsmanship, not admiring the mystery of the other party's swordsmanship and immersing himself in the mystery of the other party's swordsmanship. Without any hesitation, Tsing Hui's body, which had been liberated multiple times and constantly tempered, erupted with a powerful force. The sword light flashed, sweeping out bursts of thunder under the extreme speed, fiercely colliding with Tang Shua's sword shadow that was stabbing down. Although he deliberately suppressed the inner qi in his body and even condensed the divine souls of the Golden Crow and the Torch Dragon into a single point, the pure power brought by his strong physique still shook the spirit sword in Tang Shua's hand and sent it flying backward. The tranquil and intoxicating sword intent was completely shattered by this overbearing and violent power, breaking all techniques with one force. Bang! The spirituality collapsed. A part of Tang Shua's body suddenly disappeared, flying more than 10 meters away before falling to the ground. His face was even more gloomy than before. He glanced at Tsing Hui and did not launch another attack. Instead, he shook his head regretfully, and then the spirituality converged and re-injected into the spirit sword. At this time, Tsing Hui seemed to see clearly that the spirit sword's name was Tang Shua. What is this? Tsing Hui walked a few steps to Tang Shua's sword, his mind not only recalling the tranquil sword intent that he had suddenly immersed himself in, but at the same time, the image of Tang Shua's spirit body converging flashed across his mind. I defeated the sword spirit, but didn't get the sword spirit's recognition. Tsing Hui figured out what had happened to him. Although he had suppressed the power of his true essence and divine soul, his body, which had been constantly tempered by true essence over the years, still had a crushing advantage over the sword spirit, who was merely at the awakening realm. Just now, when he suddenly woke up from the shock of Tang Shua's sword intent, he did not control his strength well and severely injured the sword spirit. So, failed? Frowning, Tsing Hui stepped forward again and used his sword intent to shake Tang Shua's sword spirit, trying to awaken the sword spirit of Tang Shua. Unfortunately, there was no movement. Tang Shua's sword seemed to have turned into an ordinary iron sword. It did not respond to Tsing Hui's sword intent at all. Helpless, Tsing Hui could only change his direction. He slightly sensed the area where the sword intent was stronger and walked toward the next spirit sword. As Tsing Hui had just set foot on Wanjian Peak, he was not far from the foot of the mountain. Everyone at the foot of the mountain clearly saw the process of him fighting with the sword spirit. Although he defeated the sword spirit, he did not get the sword spirit's recognition. The cultivators on North Moon Peak, Aurora Peak, and other peaks all breathed a sigh of relief. It really didn't work. It seems that we worried too much. Like I said, the top sword masters of the Hidden Sword Continent, who have dedicated their lives to the sword, can only get the recognition of a few sword spirits. Yu Qing, even if he has amazing means, it is still wishful thinking for him to get the recognition of the sword spirit. He can find a spirit sword in the first place and awaken the sword spirit in the spirit sword. It can be seen that he has some ability, but this ability is not worth mentioning for many cultivators of the Hidden Sword Continent. If we talk about the study and understanding of sword manuals, swordsmanship, and swordsmanship, the Hidden Sword Continent can definitely be ranked in the top 10, even in Heaven Wasteland. All kinds of voices came from the mouths of the people of the Hidden Sword sect. They all had expected this. Su Xiao and the others of the Shun Hui Chamber of Commerce also looked lonely. Mr. Yu Qing. Sigh. Perhaps Mr. Yu Qing is an expert in the way of the sword in his master's eyes, but to our Hidden Sword Continent, he's nothing. You have to know that the great Hidden Sword Venerable had once discussed the way of the sword with the White Rainbow Sword Sect's Supreme Sword Master. And in the end, the Supreme Sword Master was impressed by his understanding of the way of the sword. From this, it can be seen that the Hidden Sword Venerable's understanding of the way of the sword and our Hidden Sword sect's deep foundation in the way of the sword. Even the disciples of our Hidden Sword sect can't cause 100 swords to chant at the same time, let alone Mr. Yu Qing, who's just a cultivator of the sword, Xing Lian sighed. Although they had already guessed that this might be the result when Tsing Hui went to Wanjian Peak, when this scene really happened in front of them, they still could not suppress the disappointment in their hearts. The idea of awakening the Hidden Sword Venerable by going to Wanjian Peak was obviously not going to work. Chapter 480. Bang! Another sword spirit was defeated by Tsing Hui. It turned into a beam of light and returned to the spiritual sword without a sound. This was the third sword spirit that Tsing Hui had defeated. He defeated the sword spirits again and again, but failed to gain their recognition. He was just like those cultivators who had come to the Myriad Swords Peak. When the people at the foot of the mountain saw this, their interest was greatly reduced. Almost half of the cultivators who had gathered at the foot of the mountain to watch the show had left. Even the people from the Aurora Peak, the North Moon Peak, and the Hidden Sword Peak who had heard the news had left. Only the people from the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce stayed. They looked at Tsing Hui, who was gradually becoming indistinct. There was an indescribable sadness in their eyes. It shouldn't have anything to do with cultivation. Tsing Hui recalled the sword spirit that he had just defeated. He had been fighting with the sword spirit for 6 whole hours. During those 6 hours, he had been controlling his own strength, keeping it at the level of the awakening realm. Even if it was only the strength of his body, he had not used any attacks above the true energy realm. But even so, in the end, he still did not gain the recognition of that sword spirit. If it's not related to my own strength, then what method should I use to defeat them to gain their recognition? Tsing Hui was silent for a moment. He stepped forward again and came in front of a new spiritual sword. Buzz, buzz. The sword essence vibrated. The spiritual sword in front of him was stimulated by Tsing Hui's sword essence and immediately manifested. This was a sword spirit with a sharp aura that gave people a feeling of coldness. My name is Tion Quebec. I'm a cultivator. Let me see your sword principle. Wait. Tsing Hui looked at the sword spirit, Tion K, who was about to summon his spiritual sword and attack. He said in a low voice, "What exactly is the sword principle that you keep talking about?" When I fought with the previous sword spirits, I used my own comprehension of sword intent and used it as a foundation to activate the sword arts derived from sword intent. However, I was unable to gain your recognition time and time again. Then, tell me, what is the way of the sword that you speak of? Sword Dao. What exactly is it? Tsing Hui's question made Tion K a little confused. It looked at Tsing Hui as if it was thinking of something. However, after a long while, it still frowned and could not think of anything. I don't know. It's been too long. Perhaps it's because my memories are missing, or perhaps it's because of some other reason. In short, I can't answer you. But there's a voice in my heart telling me that the brand of my sword Dao still remains in my body. When I see a sword Dao that can truly resonate with me, I'll naturally acknowledge its existence. Tion K said in a low voice. His tone seemed to contain an indescribable pain. It was a pain that even it did not understand. It was as if it clearly knew that it had something incomparably important to it, something so important that it had given up its entire life. However, it was unaware of it and still stubbornly clung to that belief, waiting for the day when it would awaken and regain its glory. "Let's begin," Tian K said with a hollow tone, as though he was an artificial intelligence mechanically carrying out his duties. That was all. Bang! The swords clashed, and sparks burst forth. An hour later, Tian K's spirituality dimmed. He looked at Xing Hui, who had been suppressing his strength and had been stabbed 12 times. There was still no light in his eyes, as though he was an old man with one foot in the grave. "You worked very hard, but this is not the sword principle that I want." Whoosh! As Tian K finished speaking, his figure returned to the spiritual sword, but it had lost its color. Phew! Xing Hui panted slightly. Even though he had been stabbed 12 times, the recovery effect was too strong. In the time it took for him to catch his breath, the sword wounds had already begun to heal. In less than 10 breaths, only a red mark was left on the sword wounds. It's still not the sword principle. Could it be that I have to suppress my strength to the blood-changing realm? But the strength of a sword spirit surpasses that of an ordinary true chi realm cultivator. Compared to a spirit refining realm cultivator, they are not inferior. In addition, they are equivalent to the combination of sword intents. Even if their spirituality has been worn down over the years, they still have a strong resistance against sword intents. My sword intents are only able to display less than 10% of its power. If I were to suppress my strength to the blood-changing realm, even with the recovery effect of a rank 10 true chi realm cultivator, I would not be their opponent. Xing Hui was filled with heaviness. The difference in strength was too big. It was not something that he could win by risking his life. Sword principle. Xing Hui carefully recalled the words of the sword spirits. Almost every sword spirit would mention the two-word sword principle. It could be seen that the core of the problem was the sword principle. As for the sword principle, is the killing sword principle of the ancient sword principle considered a sword principle that could gain their recognition? Xing Hui's mind flashed with various changes regarding the killing sword principle. However, the ancient killing sword principle corresponded to the white tiger, one of the 6 saints. In the cultivation world, the upper limit of a ferocious beast growth was the immortal level. Even the top ferocious beasts would reach the peak of immortal level rank 6 if they did not encounter a great opportunity. Spiritual beast growth was rank 12, while holy beast growth was rank 18. The 6 saints' growth was between mythical beasts and holy beasts. Their growth could reach rank 19, and some of them could even reach rank 20 if they were lucky enough. However, compared to the many sword principles that Xing Hui was using, they were still lacking. One had to know that although most of the sword manuals that he had obtained were only at the endless and golden core levels, the principles of these sword manuals were basically aimed at mythical beasts. The strength of the sword principle was directly related to the principles of the sword. After all, the sword principle was the cultivator's own will. After a moment of silence, Xing Hui went forward again. Not long after, he found another sword spirit. While he was deep in thought and searching for the sword spirit, his injuries had all recovered. Although his clothes were tattered and he looked a little pathetic, it did not affect his combat strength at all. Buzz buzz! The sword principle was activated. Soon, the sword spirit in the spiritual sword was awakened. A middle-aged man who looked gentle and elegant like a spring breeze appeared in front of Xing Hui. When the man appeared, his eyes were also filled with confusion. However, after a while, he recovered and nodded slightly at Xing Hui. "It's been a long time since I've seen a satisfactory experience, sir. I hope your sword principle can inspire me. I'm Qing Yi. Please enlighten me." Sword principle. Xing Hui looked at the man in front of him. Although he did not have much hope, he still said, "I want to know, what exactly is the sword principle that you speak of? What is your sword principle? What exactly is the sword principle that we speak of?" Qing Yi was slightly stunned while a trace of bewilderment appeared on his face. After that, he seemed to have fallen into deep thought, and this sort of deep thought only lasted for a few breaths of time before it was gradually replaced by a trace of pain and helplessness. "My sword Dao. I'm sorry. Perhaps it has been too long, and I've already forgotten exactly what my sword Dao is." You've forgotten? Sing Hui looked at Qing Yi in disbelief. As a sword spirit, you can actually forget your sword principle. I can't understand it either. But it's been too long. Too much time has passed. Anything can happen in such a long period of time. Maybe I suffered some serious injury and lost my memories, or maybe my way of the sword was defeated by someone and disappeared, leaving only the instincts of the way of the sword in me. Or maybe some other reason. But experience, sir. This is not something you need to ask. Let me see your way of the sword. Wait, I have another question. Why do you call me experienced, sir? Why? A trace of confusion flashed in Qing Ye's eyes. I can't answer you. It's been too long, and I can't remember clearly. Perhaps this is my mission here, that too long you speak of. Just how long is it? Qing Ye shook his head. I've already forgotten the concept of time from repeated, extremely long slumbers. I only know that countless lifetimes might have passed. I don't remember much anymore. Since you've woken me up, then I hope your sword Tao can be refreshing and inject a trace of a ripple into my life that's like a pool of stagnant water. In the next moment, Qing Yi no longer spoke to him and attacked with his sword. His sword principle was like a cool breeze. It was like a leisurely early summer, facing the gentle sunlight, looking for a willow tree by a clear stream, lying down on the green grass under the willow tree, with a blade of grass in his mouth, feeling the cool breeze, looking up at the clear blue sky and white clouds. Enough! A voice suddenly interrupted this indescribable feeling of relaxation. In the next moment, the scorching sun shone brightly. The sun above his head that was emitting gentle sunlight became incomparably tyrannical. Endless radiance mixed with rolling heat waves, burning this picturesque scenery of the mountains into ashes. This was the counterattack of Tsing Hui's sword principle. He had had enough of defeating the sword spirits time and time again, and seeing their regretful and dejected expressions time and time again. He had already lost patience with his adventures in the myriad swords peak. Next, he was not willing to forcefully suppress his own cultivation. At least, he would not suppress his cultivation to the level of a mortal, causing himself to be injured every time he fought with the sword spirits. Even if these injuries were nothing to his 10th level recovery ability, and he would completely recover in a short time, but he had had enough. He wanted to use the dominance of his sword principle to crush them fair and square. There were so many sword spirits on the mountain. After crushing all of them, he did not believe that he would not be able to obtain the recognition of 100 sword spirits and trigger 100 sword hymns. Bang! Qing Ye's figure abruptly appeared from the scroll-like illusion. However, unlike the other sword spirits, after being forcibly defeated by Tsing Hui's sword principle, its face did not have its usual dejected expression. Instead, it had a trace of surprise. What a tyrannical sword principle! What a violent sword principle! This sword principle is like a huge sun with boundless power, burning the sky and boiling the sea. As expected, the sword principle that I have comprehended is not suitable for killing at all. It is only suitable for the mountains and rivers. Your sword principle is the true sword principle of killing. Looking at Qing Yi, who had a strange expression, Tsing Hui paused slightly. My sword principle? Although your mastery of the sword Tao is still shallow, you've already laid down a foundation. My sword Tao is not focused on killing, so it's impossible for me to be a match for your sword Tao. Therefore, you've obtained my approval. Cultivator, please tell me your name. Tsing Hui looked at Qing Yi, somewhat stunned. This, he succeeded just like that? So simple? Could it be that these sword spirits all bullied the weak and fear the strong? He used all his strength and immediately obtained the recognition of a sword spirit? Thank you for the reward, Giant Dragon City's mayor. What I want to say is, has the bookworm changed his name? Haha, I have another chapter for you later. Chapter 481. Wait. Tsing Hui, who was stunned by the scene in front of him, suddenly had a flash of inspiration. Sword principle? Why had his sword principle failed to gain the recognition of the previous sword spirits? But now, When he used the sword intent and mobilized the brilliant and domineering power of the sword intent, it burned the sword intent scene created by Greenleaf's sword intent to ashes. The main reason was the essence of the sword principle. The sword principle that the sword spirits in front of him needed was not the many sword techniques that he had mastered, nor was it the conventional sword intent that the cultivators of this world referred to. The sword principle that they needed, it was an extremely pure will, an extremely pure belief. Just like Greenleaf in front of him, his belief seemed to have nothing to do with the sword principle, but in the end, he was able to use this sword principle as a foundation to become a sword spirit. Previously, he had also used the Torch Dragon sword intent to fight against those sword spirits. Although he had defeated these sword spirits by relying on the strength of his sword intent, he could not obtain their recognition because the sword intent that had fused with the Torch Dragon Divine Soul was no longer pure in essence. It was just like how Tsing Hui had witnessed Sword Master Bai Heng's sword intent in the past, which had led to intense conflict and doubt about his own sword intent. Whether it was Sword Master Bai Heng or all the cultivators of the sword principle in this world, their sword intent all originated from the bloodlines of the divine beasts and sacred beasts that they had cultivated. Rather than saying that they had condensed their own will, it was more accurate to say that their thought process and mental state were more in line with the divine beasts that they had cultivated. Every time their sword intent broke through, they would become closer to the original form of the divine beasts. When they reached the fourth level of the Saint Realm, they would transform into divine beasts and sacred beasts. How could such a sword intent be called a true sword intent? How could such a sword principle be called a true sword principle? Although he did not have a true definition of the sword principle in his mind, after cultivating the sword for so many years, he was certain that this world's definition of the sword principle was wrong. Whether it was the many sword manuals that he had read during this period of time, or the killing sword principle that had been passed down from ancient times, they were all just accessories of the bloodline cultivation system of the divine beasts and sacred beasts. Their true foundation was not the sword principle, but the divine beasts and sacred beasts. Just like Sword Master Bai Heng, if he asked her to give up her sword intent, it might affect her cultivation, but the effect was not great. However, if he asked her to give up the Torch Dragon bloodline that she had cultivated, she might even die on the spot. They didn't offer themselves to the sword Tao that they cultivated. Instead, they offered themselves to the bloodlines of divine beasts and saint beasts, which originated from the supreme Tao of this world. How could such a Tao of sword, such a Tao of sword, such a Tao of sword, such a Tao of sword that was born for the bloodline of godly beasts and holy beasts be recognized by these sword spirits? How could it make 100 swords sing and 10,000 swords fly together? Is this the sword Tao that you really need, the one that you truly acknowledge? Is this the sword Tao that you've completely condensed and manifested by your own essence, qi, and spirit? Is this the sword Tao that you really need? Tsing Hui suddenly had an idea. At this moment, the Torch Dragon sword intent in his spiritual world suffered a serious impact. Since when had his sword intent changed from the sword intent of the Eastern Sun sword mantra to the sword intent that was born from comprehending the Torch Dragon spirit? Refining God Pavilion. In the refining God Pavilion in the sky, from the divine refining pavilion in the sky, he began to comprehend the Torch Dragon sword intent that belonged to Master Zhu Zhao in the condensing light sword. Since then, his sword intent had taken a detour and was getting further and further away from the true sword Tao. Moreover, from then on, all his energy, essence, and spirit no longer focused on the Eastern Sun sword mantra, nor did he try to break the limits of his essence, and spirit to condense a stronger sword intent. Instead, he put all his attention on the cultivation of his bloodlines, the Golden Crow bloodline and the Torch Dragon bloodline. Moreover, as he delved deeper into these two bloodlines, his comprehension of the Eastern Sun sword mantra also decreased. In the end, he completely abandoned this technique. Now that he thought about it, how long had it been since he recalled the Eastern Sun sword mantra, the sword mantra of the Eastern Sun sword sect, in his mind? So, this is the sword intent that you want, Sing Hui muttered to himself. Immediately, his gaze fell on the torch dragon's sword intent. Judging from Qin Ye's attitude just now, he was barely acknowledging his sword Dao. After all, the sword intent condensed from the Eastern Sun Sword mantra was only at the beginner level and was far from the initial level. He estimated that if he really wanted to make 100 swords sing at the same time, his sword intent would have to be at the initial level or even the phenomenal level. Moreover, it was even at the phenomenal level with the Eastern Sun Sword mantra as the foundation. However, if he really switched to cultivating sword intent, the torch dragon sword intent would definitely collapse, and by then, it would have a great impact on his cultivation. For a moment, Sing Hui couldn't help but fall silent. At this time, he had to make a choice. If he couldn't give up the torch dragon sword intent, he could forget about breaking through the myriad swords peak and making 100 swords sing at the same time. If he gave up the torch dragon sword intent, he was confident that he could cultivate the sword intent derived from the Eastern Sun Sword mantra to the initial level in half a month with his foundation and comprehension over the years. As for the phenomenal level, God knew how much time it would take. If he couldn't cultivate the sword intent to the phenomenal level, he would probably only have a 30% chance of making 100 swords sing at the same time. The price he had to pay was that the torch dragon sword intent would collapse, and even his torch dragon divine soul would be affected. The collapse of the torch dragon divine soul would definitely have an impact on his cultivation. Not to mention much, his combat strength would be reduced by at least a third. What he needed the most now was strength. Only with strength could he protect himself and obtain more Taoist rhymes. Was it worth it to kill the goose that laid the golden eggs if he lost a third of his combat strength for a mere 200 Dao runes? Let's see how far I can go first, Sing Hui muttered to himself. At the next moment, he had already walked up the mountain peak again. Not long after, he appeared in front of a spiritual sword. The sword intent emitted from this spiritual sword was stronger than the previous ones. Moreover, before activating the spirituality in this spiritual sword, Sing Hui already felt a biting cold aura, which was completely different from the refreshing aura of the green leaf. This sword spirit. Sing Hui stepped forward and his sword intent vibrated, quickly awakening the sword spirit. In reality, his senses were not wrong. The pressure that the sword spirit gave off when it manifested was much more powerful than the sword spirits from before. Just the pulses of sword intent it gave off had already caused the sword intent of the green ruins to repel him. If he did not use the torch dragon sword intent, and just relied on the basic sword intent he had derived from the Eastern Yang sword scripture, he probably would have been defeated by the sword spirit before long. My name is Zhui Feng. Experienced, sir. Wake me up from my slumber. Let me see what kind of sword principle you have comprehended. The sword spirit, Zhui Feng, appeared and didn't waste time talking nonsense with Sing Hui. With a low growl, the sword in his hand suddenly stabbed out like a stream of light. Zhui Feng, compared to the green leaf sword, the heavenly fault sword, and the Tangshua sword, Zhui Feng's sword was filled with an oppressive aura. The sword intent contained in the edge of the sword was like an unsheathed divine weapon, carrying a sharpness that could penetrate the soul as it slashed towards Sing Hui's spiritual world. Before the sword arrived, the sword intent arrived first. The sword intent that Sing Hui cultivated from the Eastern Sun sword mantra couldn't resist for more than half a breath before it collapsed. The divine weapon in Zhui Feng's hand whistled through the air. The three elements in the sword were perfectly combined, and through this sword, it could produce 3 times the power. Even though Sing Hui reacted quickly and dodged quickly, he was still injured by Zhui Feng's sword light. The biting cold edge tore through his neck, leaving behind a trail of dark red blood. Too weak. You're no match for me just by relying on sword principle. Zhui Feng had already probed Sing Hui's bottom line with one sword strike. He immediately withdrew his sword, as if about to return to the spiritual sword. Wait, the battle isn't over yet. Sing Hui shouted loudly. At the same time, he stretched out his hand and wiped off the blood on his neck. In just a few moments, the wound caused by Zhue Feng had already begun to scab. This was the terrifying characteristic of a 10th order recovery ability. Flesh wounds like this could be easily healed. It's only a matter of time. Zhue Feng saw that Xing Hui wasn't going to give up and wanted to continue the battle. He immediately twisted his body, and the biting cold sword light once again filled his spiritual world. Even though he immediately shouted and released the sword intent from the Eastern Sun Sword mantra in an attempt to resist Zhue Feng's sword intent, he was instantly defeated by Zhue Feng's sword intent. The moment his sword intent was defeated, his spirit was shaken, which naturally led to a series of stagnant qi and blood. Even though he tried his best to block Zhue Feng's sword, he was still powerless. He could only do his best to minimize the damage this sword brought to him. Qi, blood splattered. Another sword wound appeared on Xing Hui's shoulder. If he hadn't dodged in time, this sword strike would have cut off his entire arm and shoulder. Too weak. Your sword principle has never been refined into a whole. Sword intent is sword intent. Qi and blood are qi and blood. And true qi is true qi. There's no connection between the three. Is this your sword principle? If this can be called sword principle, then I, Zhue Feng, am already standing at the peak of sword principle, a supreme master who has reached the peak. Zhue Feng stabbed out with his sword and shook his head. However, facing such a nagging sword spirit, Xing Hui wasn't angry. Instead, his eyes flashed. Sword intent is sword intent. Qi and blood are qi and blood. And true qi is true qi. They've never been refined into a whole. In other words, true sword principle requires the three to be one. Xing Hui thought. He was someone who had raised his comprehension to the 5th level, so his mind worked very quickly. Soon he had thought of something. When Zhue Feng's 3rd sword strike came at him again, he had already let out a roar. His qi and blood surged, and his true qi and spirit surged. At the same time, his spirit surged. Suddenly, the power of the originally ordinary sword intent rose sharply. Although it still couldn't block the power of Zhue Feng's sword intent, it bought him precious time, so that Zhue Feng's next sword strike only brushed past his body and didn't cause any serious damage. Is this all you can do after using all your strength? Your sword principle doesn't even have the qualifications to be a beginner. Sword principle is like crossing the sea. Sword intent is like a person, and sword qi is like a sail. As a ship, no matter how skilled the sailor is at sailing, if the ship's hull isn't solid and the sail isn't strong enough, how can it travel in the sea and reach the other side of the highest realm? As soon as Zhue Feng finished speaking, a new sword light formed. Thank you for your support. See you, Ian. The 4th update is yours. Chapter 482. Ship. Sails. Man. Xing Hui's level 5 comprehension lit up with countless sparks of inspiration when he heard Zhu Feng's words. He was extremely talented in sword cultivation. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to enter the Eastern Sun Sword sect and master the Eastern Sun Sword Codex in just a few years. He also comprehended sword intent and was revered as a sword sage in the world of martial artists. Xing Hui had not continued to study the Eastern Sun Sword scripture during this period of time, and his cultivation of sword intent had embarked on the path of comprehending the Torch Dragon sword intent in the Condensed Light sword. However, his accumulated experience had allowed him to gain an extremely deep understanding of the way of the sword. Now that he had been stimulated by Zhu Feng, the sword intent in his mental world began to circulate spontaneously. As the Eastern Sun Sword intent gradually grew stronger, the Torch Dragon sword intent was immediately impacted and shaken, gradually collapsing. The way of the sword is like crossing the sea. The sword intent is like a person, and the sword qi is like a sail. As a ship, no matter how great a person's sailing skills are, without a sail, they will not be able to continue. With an empty ship, without a person to control it, without a sail to power it, it will still be unable to move. It's the same with an empty ship. Only when all three of these aspects reach the peak and work together wholeheartedly can one travel the sea smoothly and reach the other shore of the supreme realm. Sing Hui's mind was filled with inspiration. His voice was like a great bell, constantly reverberating in his mental world, causing it to rumble endlessly like an earthquake. At the core of his spiritual world, the shadow that belonged to the torch dragon sword intent was peeling off and collapsing layer by layer under the continuous vibration of the great bell. It was like a peerless divine weapon that was covered in rust, and under the vibration of the vast divine sound, all the rust was shaken off, thus revealing its true sharpness. The edge of a supreme sword. Buzz, buzz. When the sword condensed in the spiritual world, the vital energy and blood within Ching Su's body were guided by the new sword intent involuntarily, fusing with the sword intent. At the same time, when all of his true essence was sealed up, the sword chi guided the vital energy and blood in his body involuntarily. It began to refine essence into chi, creating a new type of true chi that used the sword intent as a foundation. Generally speaking, before he had visualized the golden crow and the torch dragon to condense chi, but now he was condensing the supreme sword intent to condense chi. There seemed to be no difference, but in reality, however, the situation between the two had already changed silently. By visualizing the golden crow and the torch dragon, the cultivator's ultimate growth path was to transform into the golden crow and the torch dragon. The ultimate path of their cultivation was to transform into the real golden crow and the torch dragon. In other words, no matter how powerful they were, they could never surpass the real golden crow and the torch dragon. Even if they returned to their ancestors with the bloodline of the golden crow and the torch dragon, they still could not break through the shackles of the final bloodline. But at this moment, what guided his path of cultivation was no longer his bloodline, but the green ruins itself. It was the strand of sword intent he possessed, and this strand of sword intent originated from a cultivator's own will and worldview. No one knew where the ultimate achievement of this strand of sword intent lay, the way of the sword. Just as Zhu Feng was about to continue attacking and defeat Sing Hui, he seemed to sense the change in Sing Hui's aura. He suddenly stopped in his tracks, somewhat stunned. He stared blankly at Sing Hui, as if he had sensed something familiar from his body. Under the stimulation of this familiar feeling, he seemed to have thought of something. For a moment, he fell into a trance, staring at Sing Hui in a daze, not saying anything for a long time. The sword intent in Sing Hui's mental world continued to vibrate for an entire day. Fortunately, because he was already halfway up the myriad swords peak, no one could see his figure clearly if they did not fly on their swords. They did not know what he was doing on a mountain. They only felt that he was unwilling to give up and was still experiencing failure again and again. No one disturbed him along the way. When Sing Hui's mental vibrations gradually stabilized, his gaze once again focused on the sword intent in his mental world that had completely merged with his own essence, chi, and spirit. Great success of sword intent. Even though it had not reached the peak of great success of the torch dragon sword intent, which was only half a step away from perfection, but this sword intent, it was completely condensed from his own essence, chi, and spirit, representing all the essence he had cultivated so far in the Dongyang sword manual. Even if the strength of the sword intent could not be compared to back then, when Sing Hui commanded it, there was a feeling of blood and essence chi connected. Such a sword intent might be inferior to the torch dragon sword intent at the peak of great success in terms of strength, but if the two were suppressed to the essential chi, spirit refining realm, or even the unity of spirit and chi, Sing Hui could completely rely on the perfect combination of this sword chi and his essence chi to crush the torch dragon sword intent with an absolute advantage. No, it was not just crushing, it was fighting across realms. The Dongyang sword intent at the peak of the essential chi realm could defeat the torch dragon sword intent at the peak of great success in the spirit refining realm? Unbelievable. This is the true sword intent. A sword intent that completely belongs to me. My will is my Tao. This is my sword Tao. Sing Hui clenched his fist. Under the vibration of the sword intent, he felt that all the swordsmanship he had cultivated could be twice or even several times more powerful at this moment. For a moment, Sing Hui seemed to have thought of something, and his gaze immediately fell on the torch dragon sword intent. At that time, he felt something in his heart and fell into a strange state of enlightenment. All his attention was focused on the transformation of the Danyang sword intent, and he did not notice the collapse of the torch dragon sword intent at all. So when his sword intent rushed to the peak of great success, the torch dragon sword intent had completely collapsed under the impact of his Danyang sword intent. And the direct impact of the collapse of the torch dragon sword intent, the torch dragon divine's soul dimmed. It even dimmed to the point that it had a tendency to collapse. Sing Hui estimated that if he could not find a way to solve the collapse of the torch dragon sword intent in a few months, his torch dragon divine soul would completely dissipate. At that time, the torch dragon divine body that he had cultivated with great difficulty would also be annihilated and return to nothingness. Not only the torch dragon divine body, because his sword intent had already changed from the previous excavation of the Golden Crow and Torch Dragon bloodlines to the cultivation of his own sword intent by gathering his own essence, chi, and spirit. If he wanted to cultivate the Golden Crow bloodline to a higher realm in the future, he had to change the characteristics of his sword intent. From a sword intent that completely belonged to him to a sword intent that was close to the will of the Golden Crow divine beast. Otherwise, his Golden Crow bloodline cultivation would be severed. This kind of consequence made Sing Hui's heart sink. The sword Tao required sincerity and purity, and this kind of exclusivity was too strong. Only I am supreme. Sing Hui closed his eyes, and a trace of pain appeared on his face. This was a choice that was enough to torture people to collapse. When he stepped into this world, in order to pursue power, he had already abandoned his passion for the sword Tao. But now, suddenly, he'd gained sudden comprehension in the sword Tao and attained mastery in sword insight, and it had awakened his heart in the sword Tao once more. However, it just so happened that he had no choice but to face this cruel choice once more. Dream, was he still going to lose to reality? He had already lost once. Did he need to lose a second time? Or perhaps, since he had already lost once, then the second failure didn't seem so intolerable anymore. And if he still succumbed to failure the second time, then the third, fourth, fifth, and even the countless times after that, would it still be far away? A trace of confusion flashed across Sing Hui's painful expression. He couldn't see the path, couldn't see the future clearly. A brand new sword Tao, but I feel that this sword Tao is full of uncertainty. It seems to be a flash in the pan and can be extinguished at any time, drowned in the dust of history. Just as Sing Hui was tormented by this choice, a voice sounded. It was Zhu Feng, the sword spirit, Zhu Feng. Sing Hui looked at the sword spirit in front of him. This strange existence that had existed for an unknown number of years also felt confused. Do you feel the same way? Confused. Zhu Feng lowered its head. Perhaps. Many times, I do feel very confused. Just like right now, I don't know what the meaning of my existence is. Why am I staying here? Why do I have to draw my sword again and again when the trial takers come, even if some of them are weak and clumsy to the point of making me want to laugh? When it said this, Zhu Feng's face revealed a smile that didn't really look like a smile, because it had not smiled for too long, because it had been too long since its kind could make it talk properly. Day after day, the cycle repeats itself. Zhu Feng stretched out its hand and grabbed at the void, as if it wanted to grab something. Was it the traces of time? Unfortunately, there was nothing left in its hand. Sing Hui fell silent. Thousands of years of confusion. Compared to Zhu Feng, the torment and choice he was facing now seemed to be nothing. I'm very curious. If your willpower wasn't affected by this confusion, then how sharp would your sword intent, your sword edge, be affected? How could it be affected? Zhu Feng looked strangely at Sing Hui, and then he waved his hand in the air. It was not affected in the slightest. His sword intent was as sharp as ever. It was like a peerless divine weapon that had been hidden in its scabbard for dozens of years. Once it was unsheathed, even gods and ghosts would flee. Even though Tsing Hui had already cultivated the sword intent derived from the Eastern Sun Sword Codex to great success, the essence of that sword intent still gave him a soul-stirring feeling. Your sword intent. I was very confused, and there were countless doubts in my heart. But are these important? When I really need to draw my sword, I only need to put all my mind into my sword, use my sword, and wave it forward. I will use all my strength to display my sword intent. Whatever confusion, whatever doubts at that moment, all of them will leave me. Only a carefree feeling exists in my mind. So at that time, I only need to wave my sword. Wave my sword. I only need to wave my sword. Tsing Hui could not help but think of the night when he had just comprehended sword intent in the Eastern Sun Sword sect. Yes, everything else was not important. He only needed to immerse all his mind into the sword in his hand, and then follow the original intention in his heart, and wave his sword. Tsing Hui closed his eyes, and the experience of that night in the Eastern Sun Sword sect seemed to replay in his mind. Wave my sword. Wave my sword. Wave my sword. He enjoyed the joy of coming into contact with new sword techniques every day, enjoyed the joy of training until his entire body ached, enjoyed the carefree feeling of thrusting out sword after sword, and completely immerse his mind into the sword in his hand. Wave my sword. 10 swords, 100 swords, 300 swords, 1,000 swords. The traces of time gradually faded away from his body. All the distracting thoughts in his mind returned to the void. Wave my sword. And in front of him, watching him wave his sword again and again, Zhu Feng also seemed to be immersed in the trajectory of his sword, and his eyes once again became confused. No, this was not confusion. It was a kind of intoxication. What was intoxicated was not the sword intent that was triggered when he waved his sword, nor was it the sword technique that he displayed. It was a kind of spirit that was pure to the extreme. That kind of spirit was resplendent and dazzling, like a perfect and flawless gem, emitting a gaze that made any sword spirit unable to shift their eyes away. 3,000 swords, 10,000 swords, 30,000 swords, 100,000 swords. Gradually, Qin Yi, who had previously acknowledged Tsing Hui, suddenly appeared. It just stood beside Zhu Feng, looking at Tsing Hui, watching him wave his sword, looking at the extremely pure spirit on his body, as if it was looking at a rare treasure. Not long after, Tian Ke appeared, and not long after, Tang Sha also appeared. More and more sword spirits sensed this mysterious rhythm, and without needing Tsing Hui to awaken them one by one, the sword spirits began to appear spontaneously, gathering beside Tsing Hui. Looking at Tsing Hui's sword techniques that did not have any moves to speak of, they were mesmerized. Buzz buzz. A sword spirit was stirred, and the body of the sword let out a crisp sword hum. The sword hum sounded as if it had broken some kind of shackle, and more spirits' swords began to vibrate, and many of the sword spirits present softly let out long cries. 100 swords sang together. Chapter 483. It's been 3 days, and he still hasn't come down? Since he doesn't have the ability to gain the recognition of those sword spirits, he might as well go down the mountain and waste our time. That's right. Sword cultivation isn't like ordinary cultivation methods. It requires one's own sword intent to be highly compatible with the will of the mythical beasts and sacred beasts that one has comprehended. The process can't be described with words. How can ordinary cultivation methods compare to it? Our hidden sword sect has spent hundreds and thousands of years, but there haven't been many sword experts who could gain the recognition of many sword spirits at the same time, let alone an outsider. He really won't give up until he sees the coffin. He's clearly been rejected by several sword spirits, but he's still unwilling to give up and shamelessly stays on the myriad swords peak. Does he think that a miracle will happen? At the foot of the Myriad Swords peak, the patience of the people who had been waiting for 3 days was getting worse and worse, especially when they saw that Xing Hui was unwilling to come down for a long time. The matter hadn't come to a conclusion yet, so their words were naturally filled with mockery and ridicule. It was as if their voices could reach the Myriad Swords peak and disturb Xing Hui's performance, break his will, and make him give up on the Myriad Swords peak. These people, why are they all like this? There was a trace of anger in Su Zhao's eyes. Humph, by belittling Mr. Yu Qing, they're showing their position and determination, hoping to curry favor with the North Moon Peak and Aurora Peak. They're just clowns. Su Tong glanced at the cultivators who were talking endlessly and coldly snorted. Before the result is out, we shouldn't give up hope. Su Xiao looked at the Myriad Swords peak. At this time, Xing Hui had already disappeared into the undulating terrain of the Myriad Swords peak, but there was still a trace of hope in her heart. Although she knew that the probability of her hope being realized was pitifully low, but at the moment when the truth was not revealed, she was unwilling to give up. As if the heavens had heard Su Zhao's call, on the originally calm Myriad Swords peak, streaks of spiritual light whizzed and shot in the same direction. At the same time, the sounds of swords began to reverberate on the Myriad Swords peak. In just a moment, the sounds of swords chanting had become more and more frequent. Eventually, they connected into the clouds and resounded in the Myriad Swords peak for a long time. The sudden change caused the impatient crowd to freeze on the spot. They could not help but widen their eyes and stare at the Myriad Swords peak. 100 swords chant. 100 swords chant. This is the scene of 100 swords singing together. Oh my God, the rumors are true. There's actually someone who can get the approval of over 100 spiritual swords, thus producing the phenomenon of 100 swords chanting at the same time. Yu Qing? Is it the mysterious expert invited by the Divine Grace Merchant Guild? He did it. He actually did it. 100 swords chant at the same time. Oh my God, I can actually see the magnificent sight of 100 swords singing at the same time. After being stunned for a moment, a burst of uncontrollable exclamations broke out from the crowd. Everyone was shouting at the spectacular scene in front of them. As for those cultivators who had mocked and ridiculed Xing Hui earlier, they were all ashamed and hid in the crowd, not daring to show their faces. Even though they were all looking at the spectacular scene of hundreds of swords chanting at the same time on Myriad Swords Peak, they were all extremely shocked. He succeeded? Su Xiao looked at the changes on Myriad Swords Peak and was stunned for a moment. Even though she had been fantasizing about this scene for a month, when the scene of 100 swords chanting at the same time really appeared in front of her, she still could not believe it. The scene in front of her was like a dream. It was so unreal. Mr. Yu Qing, not only Su Xiao, but Su Tong also widened her eyes at the scene in front of her. However, Xing Lian, Si Tongjian, Elder Jianyin, and the rest could not help but cheer at this moment. That's great, he succeeded. Mr. Yu Qing succeeded. 100 swords chant at the same time. He did it. How is it possible? Compared to the shocked cheers of the crowd and the Divine Grace Merchant Guild, who were overjoyed at the birth of a peerless sword genius, the experts from the North Moon Peak, Aurora Peak, and even the Hidden Sword Peak were all shocked at the same time. They stared at Myriad Swords Peak with eyes full of disbelief. 100 swords chant at the same time. It's really the 100 swords chant at the same time. That Yu Qing, he actually caused the 100 swords chant at the same time. How can he do something that the Hidden Sword sect has not been able to do for hundreds of years? Damn it, we're in big trouble now. 100 swords chant at the same time. Will it alarm the Hidden Sword Venerable? It's actually the 100 swords chant at the same time. The rumors that have been passed down from the Myriad Swords Peak are actually true. This is bad. Yu Qing was invited by the Divine Grace Merchant Guild. Now that the 100 swords chant at the same time has alarmed the Hidden Sword Venerable, he only needs to tell the Hidden Sword Venerable about this, and we will definitely be punished by him. Amidst the shock, the people on the North Moon Peak, Aurora Peak, and Hidden Sword Peak were already in a mess. Among them, the North Moon Peak's Peak Master Mu Sheng Yi, Great Elder Bei Shuntong, and the rest had a cold glint in their eyes. While the 100 Swords chant at the same time is still short, and the hidden sword venerable hasn't been alarmed. Let's strike right now and kill Yu Qing like a bolt of lightning. No matter how outstanding a sword genius he is, as long as we can kill him, I believe the hidden sword venerable won't completely fall out with our North Moon Peak or the heavenly ways behind the North Moon Peak for a dead sword genius. Bei Shintong made up his mind immediately. He turned to North Moon Xian and said, I'll heavily injure Yu Qing in a while, and you'll kill the final assassin. You have the Scarlet Mystery Dowlord behind you, so no matter how furious the hidden sword venerable is, he'll never be bold enough to kill you. All right. North Moon Xian glanced at Su Xiao from the Divine Grace Merchant Guild. His eyes were cold as he agreed without any hesitation at all. Do it, Bei Shintong called out. His presence was about to erupt as well. However, the moment he released his aura in the forbidden grounds of the Hidden Sword Sect that was over 100 kilometers away, another aura that was vast, ancient, profound, and majestic suddenly rose up. In an instant, it shot straight into the clouds, stirring up the wind and clouds, causing the clouds above the mountain to be torn apart in one fell swoop, forming a huge whirlpool that was over 60 kilometers in diameter. Once the terrifying aura appeared, it immediately brought with it a vast and suffocating pressure. It rolled over and directly descended above the Myriad Swords Peak. It was a terrifying pressure that enveloped everything within 100 kilometers. It was so powerful that no one had the courage to attack. It instantly made Bei Shintong, the great elder of the North Moon Peak, who had already activated his Hunyuan and was about to attack, feel cold all over. His eyes widened in shock as he stared in the direction of the aura. His eyes were filled with uncontrollable shock and fear. It's the Hidden Sword Venerable. It's the Hidden Sword Venerable. Mu Xingyi trembled all over as his voice trembled. He had already been scared out of his wits. The Hidden Sword Venerable. He's actually still alive. Everyone's guess was wrong. The Lord of the Aurora Peak, Lu Xiangyang, paled slightly. Even the Golden Core Elders of the Hidden Sword Peak's main branch all became solemn. When they thought of what they had done in the Hidden Sword Sect during this period of time, they immediately had a bad feeling. The Hidden Sword Venerable. The Hidden Sword Venerable. This is the presence of the Hidden Sword Venerable. That's great. I knew Master Hidden Sword Venerable would be fine. The Hidden Sword Venerable has emerged. Hidden Sword Venerable since the 100 Swords chant and came out of seclusion. That's great. Hasn't there always been a rumor that the great Hidden Sword Venerable has died of old age in seclusion? Look who still dares to say that the Hidden Sword Venerable has died of old age. What a terrifying aura. 100 years ago, I personally sensed the presence of the Hidden Sword Venerable. At that time, his aura shouldn't have been so strong, right? But now, the Hidden Sword Venerable has only revealed his presence, but the pressure that it brings is so strong that I can't even think of resisting it. Could it be that the Hidden Sword Venerable's cultivation has broken through again? Compared to the North Moon Peak, Aurora Peak, and even the Hidden Sword Peak who were so shocked that they kept quiet out of fear, the other cultivators of the Hidden Sword Sect erupted into uncontrollable cheers at the same time. The Hidden Sword Venerable, Aunt Tong, did you feel it? Such a powerful presence. It's definitely the Hidden Sword Venerable's Grandmaster. Grandmaster is fine, he's fine. In the direction of the Shun Hui Chamber of Commerce, Su Xiao couldn't help but jump up and down in joy when the Hidden Sword Venerable's presence appeared. She was no longer as calm as before as she pulled Su Tong and jumped up and down in joy. Xing Lian, Si Tongjian, Jinin, and even Su Tong were filled with surprise and joy. Even though they had already predicted that Mr. Yu Qing's hymn of 100 swords would definitely draw out the Hidden Sword Venerable, they still could not help but want to cry out loudly to vent their joy when they personally sensed the Hidden Sword Venerable's presence. The Hidden Sword Venerable. Bei Shintong's shocked gaze paused in the Hidden Sword Venerable's direction for a while. As if he thought of something, his gaze suddenly landed on North Moon Xian. His gaze seemed to contain a sliver of uncontrollable shock. When North Moon Xian sensed Bei Shintong's questioning gaze, he sucked in a deep breath and nodded firmly. His expression was extremely ugly. The aura that the hidden sword venerable has demonstrated this time is indeed no weaker than my master's. It's true. With North Moon Xian's confirmation, Bei Shintong was mildly surprised. Afterwards, he was like a punctured balloon, immediately withering away. A large chunk of his vital energies seemed to have been sucked away. Bei Shintong was the greatest expert in the Hidden Sword sect, second only to the Hidden Sword Venerable. If it were not for the fact that the heavens had sworn the Hidden Sword Venerable was dead and were willing to give him the resources to complete a high-grade golden core, and even let the sect master of the Scarlet Mystery sect take in their most outstanding junior, North Moon Xian, as a disciple, why would he betray the Hidden Sword Venerable and betray the interests of the Hidden Sword sect to side with the heavens? But now, not only was the Hidden Sword Venerable still alive, but his cultivation had broken through again, becoming even more powerful than before. And in the past few years, he had caused countless losses to the Hidden Sword sect. I'm finally back to the main topic. Why does the introduction say he's called the Tsing Hui Sword Venerable in the Divine Wilderness and not the Sword Master, Sword Saint, Sword God, Sword Emperor, and so on? The answer will gradually be revealed. Chapter 484. Tsing Hui's state of epiphany lasted for 10 days. Due to the suppression of Hidden Sword Venerable's aura, his 10 days of cultivation could be said to be peaceful. He could freely express the suppression and understanding of Sword Tao that he had suppressed over the years. When he woke up from the mysterious state of epiphany, his Sword Tao naturally broke through to the perfect level. When the conditions were right, success would follow naturally. It was easy. Walking on the bloodline cultivation path, his talent was twice the work for half the result. He relied on the chaotic level and various Taoist rhymes to comprehend Sword Tao. However, it allowed him to get twice the result with half the effort. It was as if the game that was originally in hell mode had suddenly changed to easy mode. The rapid growth made him somewhat stunned. As Tsing Hui woke up from his epiphany, the spirituality of the many sword spirits on myriad swords peak gradually dissipated. After a while, they returned to their respective spiritual swords and fell into silence again. The difference was that their spirituality was stronger than before. "Experience, sir." A voice echoed in Tsing Hui's ears. It was the sword spirit, Zhu Feng. Tsing Hui's gaze fell on the sword spirit. "You've received our approval." After Zhu Feng finished speaking, he bowed slightly to Tsing Hui. "Can you tell me your name?" "My name is Tsing Hui." Tsing Hui. There was a sliver of satisfaction in Zhu Feng's eyes. "I will remember that in the journey of my life that I don't have many memories of, a swordsman called Qing Su gave me a rare experience of sword intent. It's my honor." Zhu Feng nodded. In the next moment, its spirituality dissipated. It had turned into a stream of light and entered the spiritual sword. Tsing Hui's gaze paused on Zhu Feng for a moment. He raised his head slightly and looked in a direction that was hundreds of kilometers away. There, he could feel a strong and suffocating aura. This aura was so strong that even the remnant sword of the Almighty's true body could not be compared to it, let alone the Black Heaven Taoist master that he encountered back then. "Little friend, would you like to take a trip to my burial sword peak?" As Tsing Hui looked in the direction of the aura seemed to have sensed that Tsing Hui had completed his epiphany. Its voice suddenly rang out in the void. "My pleasure." Tsing Hui nodded and flew up on his sword, heading straight in the direction of the aura. As for the fact that the torch dragon's soul was on the verge of collapse due to the breakthrough of his sword intent, he couldn't care too much about it for the time being. He's out. Mr. Yu Qing is out." Tsing Hui flew out of the myriad sword's peak on his sword. Many cultivators who were still guarding the foot of the mountain suddenly exclaimed in surprise. "This direction," Mr. Yu Qing is heading towards the burial sword peak where the hidden sword venerable is in seclusion. He was indeed summoned by the hidden sword venerable. Divine Grace Merchant Guild's Su Xiao couldn't help but ask excitedly, will he tell hidden sword venerable about the unfair treatment our Divine Grace Merchant Guild received? He will. He definitely will, Su Tong said firmly. Su Tong said with conviction. In the end, she glanced in the direction of the North Moon Peak. Can't you see that everyone at the North Moon Peak is in a state of panic right now? They've been trying to make up for their mistakes in the past 10 days. North Moon Peak? Su Xiao glanced in the direction of the North Moon Peak. In the past 10 days, many people from a North Moon Peak had left. Most of them were trying to think of a way to deal with the hidden sword venerable's reprimand. There were even some people who secretly found her, the president of the Divine Grace Merchant Guild, and expressed that the North Moon Peak was willing to apologize for what they had done to the Divine Grace Merchant Guild during this period of time. They hoped that the Divine Grace Merchant Guild could forgive the North Moon Peak. For the North Moon Peak to beg the Divine Grace Merchant Guild in such a humble manner was something that had never happened before during this period of time. They won't be happy for long. Tsing Hui's mind was no longer on the internal affairs of the Hidden Sword sect. He did not find it strange that the Hidden Sword Venerable was still alive. After all, even if an Almighty had lived for almost 3,000 years, he would have taken many heavenly treasures to extend his life. It was not surprising that he was still alive. At this moment, what he really wanted to know the most was the 10,000 Swords Peak. What secrets did the 10,000 Swords Peak hold? And the many sword spirits on the 10,000 Swords Peak, why did they exist? These questions could only be answered after meeting Hidden Sword Venerable and asking Hidden Sword Venerable in person. To Tsing Hui, 100 kilometers was easily traversed in less than half an hour. As he pressed down on the sword light, he directly landed on the mountain where the Hidden Sword Venerable lived. When he landed on the mountain, he discovered that the entire mountain was sealed by a tyrannical and cold sword intent. Although this sword intent was completely different from the sword intent that Tsing Hui had comprehended this time, it was born from visualizing the white tiger. However, the killing power contained within was enough to kill any golden core stage expert who easily stepped into it. It was precisely because of the protection of this formation that even though the sect master of the Hidden Sword sect and the elders of the Golden Core stage wanted to know if the Hidden Sword Venerable was safe and sound, they still did not dare to step onto the Burial Sword Peak to investigate. However, at this moment, the sword formation on the mountain had already left a path. As Tsing Hui followed this path and landed on the Burial Sword Peak, the sword formation once again sealed off the Burial Sword Peak. In a courtyard of the Hidden Sword Peak, an old man who looked rather old and was filled with an ancient and decaying aura was looking at him with a smile on his face. When I sense the aura on your body, I guess that you shouldn't be that old. That kind of vitality can't be faked. However, when I saw you in person, I discovered that you're actually even younger than I imagined. You're truly a heaven-sent genius. The old man looked at Tsing Hui and praised him from the bottom of his heart. Tsing Hui did not need any introduction to recognize the old man in front of him. He immediately stepped forward and bowed slightly. Greetings to the Hidden Sword Venerable. No need for formalities. Please take a seat. The Hidden Sword Venerable gestured with his hand and invited Tsing Hui into a small pavilion in the courtyard. Tsing Hui also sized up the Hidden Sword Venerable with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He could sense that the sword intent that the Hidden Sword Venerable emitted faintly formed a strong pressure on him. This pressure did not only come from the nature of his sword intent, but also from his mental strength level. With the combination of these two factors, even Tsing Hui's perfect sword intent was inferior to his. However, what really surprised him was the energy ripples on the Hidden Sword Venerable's body. That energy ripple, it was not even comparable to the Golden Core stage incarnation of the Black Heaven Taoist Master, let alone the broken sword of a newly ascended Almighty. This was not in line with the terrifying aura that the Hidden Sword Venerable had unleashed earlier. Was the aura not proportional to his strength? Or was he unable to see through it because his cultivation was too low? Young friend, you could see through it? The hidden sword venerable noticed that Sing Hui's expression was strange and answered rather casually. Sword venerable? The hidden sword venerable nodded slightly. You're right. I'm indeed not in the divine realm. Why? Sing Hui frowned. The hidden sword venerable was already a powerful figure 1,000 years ago. Even if he did not make any progress in the past 1,000 years, his cultivation should not have regressed and become a golden core cultivator. It's very simple. I've recultivated. The hidden sword venerable said calmly, as if he was talking about something unimportant. However, the information in his words made Sing Hui's heart skip a beat. He immediately thought of the problem that his torch dragon divine body and golden crow divine body were facing. Sword venerable, you're saying that you've given up your divine realm cultivation and switched to the sword Dao. Divine realm, the hidden sword venerable shook his head. I've already broken through to the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth 100 years ago. Lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. The hidden sword venerable nodded slightly. After that, I came into contact with the essence of the sword Dao by chance. 60 years ago, I made up my mind to abandon my cultivation and switch to the sword Dao. Phew! Sing Hui heaved a long sigh of relief when he heard the news. A great figure at the peak of the Saint Realm was equivalent to the strongest Dao Lord in the Heaven Dao, yet he was actually willing to abandon his cultivation at the peak of perfection to cultivate in the sword Dao. Such determination. Sing Hui was filled with respect. At this moment, he also vaguely understood why the hidden sword venerable had not died, but why he still watched the Grand Supreme, Aurora Peak, and North Moon Peak, which were supported by the heavenly axiom, abuse their power in his hidden sword sect. It was because after giving up his divine realm cultivation, he no longer had that kind of power. Rather than that, he might as well hide behind the scenes and intimidate the North Moon Peak and the Aurora Peak. At the very least, the North Moon Peak and the Aurora Peak would not dare to cross the line. Don't look at me like I'm a martyr. The hidden sword venerable smiled when he saw the change in Sing Hui's expression. Actually, things aren't as bad as you think. Sing Hui thought about the powerful sword essence that the hidden sword venerable released earlier. Moreover, he did not think that the hidden sword venerable was someone who would act rashly without considering the consequences. He said in a deep voice, I'd like to hear the details. Even though I abandoned my divine ability and chose to cultivate in the sword Dao, but the outcome isn't as bad as you imagine. If I'm fast in 1 or 2 years, and if I'm slow in 8 or 10 years, my sword Dao will return to its peak in a completely new state and blossom with boundless brilliance. As the hidden sword venerable said that, his gaze landed on Qing Su. Originally, I didn't plan on showing myself so early. After all, I only have a few years left before I reach major achievement in the way of the sword. However, the hymn of 100 swords, I really don't want to see a genius of the way of the sword like you end up like me, walking down the wrong path again and wasting your youth for nothing. As a result, I came out of seclusion early and summoned you. I hope that I won't be the only one walking down the path of the way of the sword in the future. Sing Hui was suddenly enlightened. He bowed deeply to the hidden sword venerable and said, Hidden sword venerable, please enlighten me. Of course, this is why I called you here. The venerable of the hidden sword looked at Qing Su and spoke with a sliver of irrepressible excitement. He was like a traveler who had traveled through the desert alone for several decades. He did not know day or night, direction, or the future. After being tormented by this loneliness for decades, he suddenly saw a creature like himself and could not wait to tell it about all his experiences over the years. The sword way that truly existed in the ancient times is not the one we imagined. It has a completely different form, and the power it possesses is far beyond our imagination. Even though I've only seen a small step forward, I believe that if I can really demonstrate this small step of the sword way that I saw, the light that will bloom will definitely amaze the entire infinite wasteland domain. Today, there's still 5 chapters. Chengfen has exploded. Do you guys want to explode as well? The support from the recommendation votes should not be lacking. Chapter 485. The Way of the Sword from the Ancient Times. Tsing Hui's Way of the Killing Sword was said to have originated from the ancient times. The ancient times that I'm talking about are much older than the ancient times that you know of. It was a time so long ago that there were no records of it. At that time, heaven and earth were in harmony, yin and yang were in harmony, trees were everywhere, palaces were connected, celestial birds were flying, and there was an ancient creature called the Celestial. It was immortal and could travel with the wind, gathering to discuss the Tao. This time should be traced back to before the divine wilderness. Before the divine wilderness, from what Tsing Hui knew, the ancient divine wilderness was destroyed by many powerful people 10,000 years ago. It was shattered into a boundless land with Tianhuang as the center. There were many islands like Eastern Wilderness, Chongjin, and Hidden Sword. They were just one of the many islands that were destroyed in the divine wilderness. As for the information before the divine wilderness was destroyed, he had not heard of it. After all, even if there were sects that survived the destruction of the divine wilderness, there would be very little information left behind after the catastrophe. Before the divine wilderness, even the ancient times that belonged to the divine wilderness, Hidden Sword Venerable's eyes flashed, and he was happy with his discovery. According to the information that I've gathered and the conversations with the sword spirits on the Myriad Sword Peak, I've come up with a new way of the sword. It's a way of the sword that is not inferior to the way of the bloodline. After he finished speaking, Hidden Sword Venerable waved his hand, and a sword aura formed in his hand. In just a moment, it turned into a peerless divine sword. As soon as the sword appeared, Qingsu immediately felt life-threatening danger. Just a glance at the sword was enough to make his heart palpitate. The destructive power within the sword had completely exceeded the limits of the power he had been aiming for all these years, especially on this divine sword. He saw the shadow of a black tiger. It was as if it was carved on the divine sword. It was very lifelike, as if it was alive. This sword, this is my destiny divine sword. It's called the Hidden Edge Sword. It's level 12. Level 12. Tsing Hui thought of the condensing light sword. Can a level 12 divine sword be this powerful? A 12th grade divine sword naturally can't have this kind of power, but the vault sheath in my hand can't be measured by 12th grade divine sword at all. It's the vessel of my divine ability and battle constitution, the carrier of my divine powers and battle body. That's right. Hidden Sword Saint smiled and said, all this time, we have been cultivating the sword Tao because of the bloodline of godly beasts and saint beasts. Even the sword Tao that was passed down from the godly desolate era still revolves around godly beasts and saint beasts. No matter how powerful they are, they're just supplements for the bloodline of godly beasts and saint beasts. Through the constant contact with the sword spirits on the 10,000 Swords Peak and the ancient knowledge that I have learned, I have found a new cultivation direction for us Sword Tao cultivators 100 years ago. It is a cultivation direction that is more suitable for me and for those who seek the Sword Tao. If this cultivation direction is correct, our cultivation will no longer be limited by the bloodline of godly beasts and saint beasts. Even those who cultivate the bloodline of godly beasts and saint beasts can break their own limits and reach the highest level. Tsing Hui seemed to have thought of something. His eyes fell on the black tiger engraving on Hidden Edge Sword, and a bolt of lightning flashed in his heart. Hidden Sword Venerable, the bloodline that you have awakened. You're right. The Black Tiger bloodline. The Black Tiger bloodline. Hidden Sword Venerable admitted in a self-deprecating manner. Spiritual beasts. Although spirit beasts could grow to the peak of the saint realm, they had to be the best among spirit beasts or a close relative of a saint beast who had a part of the bloodline of a saint beast. Generally, the upper limit of a spirit beast growth was often the golden core realm, especially when they were close to the bloodline shackles. The resources that a spirit beast bloodline cultivator needed to spend were several times that a saint beast or even a divine beast bloodline cultivator. Hidden Sword Venerable was able to use the bloodline of the spiritual beasts to reach the almighty realm. Later on, he even reached the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. What kind of talent, and perseverance did he have? Unfortunately, it was precisely because of the existence of the bloodline shackles that the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth had become a nightmare that he could never break through. He would be trapped in the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth for the rest of his life, and he could forget about having any extravagant hope of breaking through. Xing Hui guessed that this might be the reason why he was willing to devote all his attention to the way of the sword. He was looking for another way out. His way out was not to pursue the way of the sword, but power. This was the reason why Hidden Sword Venerable was not able to trigger the hymn of 100 swords back then. I've sealed my soul, my flesh, and my abilities into my natal sword, the Hidden Edge Sword. I've also refined the Hidden Edge Sword into my body. Hidden Sword Venerable looked at the Hidden Edge Sword in his hand. The aura on the Hidden Edge Sword was tumbling, and the power it contained was earth-shattering. Once it was unleashed, it would not be inferior to the divine powers of the Almighty. If he really merged his natal sword with his divine powers, then the power of this divine sword would be able to kill a divine being, divine soul, body, divine powers. Is this a sacrifice to the sword? Xing Hui was silent. Sacrifice to the sword? This is not a sacrifice to the sword, but a protection to the sword. We cultivators cultivate the way of the sword. Just the passion for the sword is not enough. We also need a powerful force to protect us in the process of cultivating and comprehending the way of the sword. This method of refining the divine soul, body, and divine powers into the sword is the protection method I created. Protection method? That's right. What is the core of the natal sword? This divine sword is connected to your own sword intent, and the sword intent is the fusion of your spirit and your beliefs. It is the core of your way of the sword. Unfortunately, the core of the way of the sword doesn't have a powerful protective force. The sword chi and sword techniques derived from it are far from comparable to the divine beast battle bodies and the various divine abilities. You pursue the way of the sword, but you don't have a protective force. You can only watch as the geniuses who have dedicated their lives to the way of the sword are crushed into dust by the battle bodies. This kind of way of the sword, in my opinion, is incomplete. So, I combined what I have learned and created this protective method for us sword cultivators. Fusing the battle bodies, the divine soul, and the power of divine abilities into the natal divine sword. Once the natal divine sword is forged, when the natal sword venerable finished speaking, an unprecedentedly powerful aura rose from his body. I can kill saints. Xing Hui looked at the natal sword venerable and hidden sword venerable's hand that had not completely transformed. Kill saints. This was not an empty promise. However, when a cultivator's divine powers, and divine powers are all fused into the natal sword venerable, without the protection of divine powers and divine powers, the cultivator will be extremely weak. Even you, hidden sword venerable, can't withstand the attack of a golden core cultivator. How are you going to protect yourself? Protect myself? Hidden Sword Venerable said arrogantly. Why do you need to protect yourself? He looked at Xing Hui and asked, Do you know what a real swordsman's strongest defense is? Xing Hui was silent for a moment. Then, he looked up and said, Attack. That's right. Attack. Hidden Sword Venerable raised his hand and slashed forward as if he was going to cut the void in front of him in half. A real swordsman's strongest defense is his attack. 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 Attack again. Attack like fire and attack like thunder. Why should we defend when the enemy attacks us with divine powers? We just need to attack. Attack. Attack again. Shatter all of the enemy's attacks. Techniques, divine powers, battle body, divine weapons, rare treasures. I have a sword that can break all attacks. Ha ha, this is our defense. This is the strongest defense of a swordsman. Attack is the best defense. Sing Hui immediately understood Hidden Sword Venerable's thoughts. By fusing divine powers and divine powers into the natal sword Venerable, he might be so weak that a golden core cultivator could kill him, a phenomenon of heaven and earth cultivator. However, as long as his attack was strong enough, as long as his attack was fast enough, any attack of his enemy would be destroyed by his sword before it could hit him. How could all the techniques, constitutions, weapons, and treasures in the world hurt him at all? This was the sword Tao that Hidden Sword Venerable had learned. This was why Hidden Sword Venerable dared to claim that he could kill a divine being. Of course, killing a saint was one thing, and killing a saint was another. He might be able to tear apart a saint's domain with a single strike of his sword, but he might not be able to shatter it with a single strike. As long as that saint pulled back and avoided his attack, the power of the domain would sweep over him, and he, who was weak and fragile, would be reduced to ashes. Ultimate Tao, Sing Hui murmured to himself. Sword Tao is the ultimate Tao. Hidden Sword Venerable continued Sing Hui's words and said, abandoning defense, abandoning all transformations, and even sacrificing one's own life to turn everything one has into an attack. This is the Sword Tao that I understand. I call it the ultimate Sword Tao. At this point, his tone was slightly low, but his voice contained a vast power that shook one's heart. Perhaps in this way, we won't be able to create protective talismans, we won't be able to transform our vital energy into bodies, we won't be able to transform endlessly, and we won't be able to live forever. But at least we'll be able to forge a sword, an indestructible sword, a sword that can break through anything, a sword that is invincible, a sword that will be able to stun everything in the world as long as it's unsheathed. Ultimate sword. Sing Hui's right hand, which he always used to hold his sword, trembled slightly. He felt that something in his heart was gradually awakening. Ultimate sword. Hidden Sword Venerable nodded heavily. The core of this cultivation method is whether the natal legendary sword can carry the power of the divine being, the battle body, and the divine being. The natal legendary sword is the combination of the divine being and the sword intent. Is your sword intent strong enough to suppress the various powers in the natal legendary sword and make it willingly protect you? My sword will is incomplete, and the Tao of divine ability has been deeply rooted in my mind for thousands of years. Thus, I spent 60 years, but I was unable to completely suppress the Tao of divine ability, the Tao of divine ability, and the Tao of divine ability that had fused into the hidden edge sword and fused them into my natal sword. However, you're different. You have only cultivated for a short period of time, and your mind has yet to form that supreme bloodline and spiritual consciousness. Furthermore, your sword will is so powerful that it can cause 100 swords to hum at the same time. Thus, you are the best successor to my Tao of sword. Chapter 486. Successor. Sing Hui raised his head and looked at Hidden Sword Venerable. The Hidden Sword Venerable looked at Qing Su at this moment. There was a sliver of gratification from making friends with the same kind in his eyes, as well as a sliver of anticipation for his future. My current accomplishments are already the limit. I'm too old, and I've been affected too deeply by my supreme bloodline. If I make a breakthrough as I strengthen my sword and reach sainthood, I can't guarantee that my sword intent will still be able to suppress my abilities, body, and soul after I understand how powerful sainthood experts are. I can't guarantee that my sword intent will still be able to suppress my abilities, body, and soul after I understand how powerful sainthood experts are. I can't guarantee that I'll give up on the way of the sword and cultivate my bloodline again. However, you're different. You're very young, very young. Youth means unparalleled malleability. In particular, your sword intent gives you a unique advantage when it comes to refining your bloodline and abilities. As a result, as long as you persist, you'll be able to surpass me one day and truly stand at the peak of the world, announcing to the world that I'm the supreme way of the sword. If that day comes, I, Hidden Sword Venerable, will die with no regrets, giving up all means in exchange for an extremely powerful attack. The ultimate sword. Sing Hui's mind was filled with thoughts. The ultimate sword's advantage was obvious. A life-bound sword born from a transcendent realm cultivation was already enough to make him invincible in the Saint realm in terms of offense. If the energy within the life-bound sword reached the level of lawful embodiment of heaven and earth, it could even slay saints. No, Sing Hui's foundation was stronger than Hidden Sword Venerable's. If he used a divine ability, or even a supreme divine ability, to nurture his sword, the pure power of his attack would be even stronger. He would be able to threaten saints the moment his divine ability was formed. If he used a supreme divine ability to nurture his sword, it would be possible for it to have the power to kill gods. But the disadvantages were also obvious. There were no transformations, no additional techniques, and their defenses were so weak that they could be threatened by cultivators in the Golden Core realm or below. Once they were hit by the divine ability of a transcendent realm expert, they would die if they were hit and be injured if they were touched. But these disadvantages were not unavoidable. Immortal body, backtracking, this was a unique advantage that he had gained by borrowing the power of the Chaos Temple. Even Hidden Sword Venerable was no match for him. Therefore, compared to Hidden Sword Venerable, he was more suitable for the ultimate sword principle. Besides, Sing Hui thought of the way of the sword and the way of the bloodline. Between the two, he clearly preferred the former. If the way of the sword was his life's dream, then previously it was because the dream had to be built on the foundation of reality. Without the economic foundation to survive, how could he give up everything to pursue his dream? And now, the ultimate sword Dao was equivalent to giving him a sufficient financial foundation to pursue his dreams. If he still chose to put down the sword in his hand under such circumstances, how can I cultivate Hidden Sword Venerable's ultimate sword Dao? Sing Hui said solemnly. If you want to learn, I'll teach you. Hidden Sword Venerable said with a smile. Qing Su took 3 steps back before standing before the Hidden Sword Venerable. He bowed towards the Hidden Sword Venerable seriously. Please teach me, Hidden Sword Venerable. All right. There were no conditions, and there was no hesitation. Hidden Sword Venerable agreed without hesitation. In the next moment, his eyes lit up. A powerful sword essence that contained endless information shot out from his spiritual world and rushed into Sing Hui's spiritual world. Then, it exploded in Sing Hui's spiritual world. It carried with it a vast amount of information and countless mysteries that bloomed in his spiritual world. Sing Hui did not hesitate when he received the information. He immediately closed his eyes and focused on comprehending the sword essence. Hidden Sword Venerable was comforted when he saw that Lin Huang had absolute trust in him. However, what Hidden Sword Venerable did not know was that Sing Hui did not guard against him. Instead, it was that he was still in a backtrack skill and was not afraid of death. It took Sing Hui an entire day to digest the information that Hidden Sword Venerable had given him. Not only did the information include the conversion method for the ultimate way of the sword, but it also included the various experiences the Hidden Sword Venerable had gone through in the past 60 years. The Hidden Sword Venerable had passed everything to Qing Su without holding anything back. These experiences were invaluable to him. They would allow him to take a lot of detours. After digesting the information, Sing Hui opened his eyes again and bowed to Hidden Sword Venerable. Thank you, Hidden Sword Venerable. It's a pity that I'm old. This is the end of my life. I don't think I'll be able to live for long if I convert to the ultimate sword Dao. Otherwise, I'd be able to teach you more things in the future. 100 Swords Chant. This is the first time we've seen such a genius in the Sword Dao since the Hidden Sword Sect was founded. I really want to know what kind of achievements such a genius in the Sword Dao will have. I'm sure Hidden Sword Venerable will be able to see it. Haha. Thank you for your kind words. Hidden Sword Venerable said as he looked at Sing Hui, because you've comprehended the pure sword essence, your original sword essence has collapsed, right? In order to not affect the divine beast bloodline that you cultivate, you should quickly choose your natal divine sword and refine all of this power into your natal divine sword. Natal holy sword, Sing Hui nodded. In the cultivation of extreme, sword Dao, sword intent was the most important, but the natal divine swords used to carry the gold crow divine body, torch dragon divine body, gold crow divine soul, and torch dragon divine soul were equally important. If the natal divine sword were not strong enough to carry enough power, he would have to spend a lot of energy to refine them, so as to prevent them from limiting the power of the gold crow and torch dragon bloodlines. I have a variety of materials I prepared when I changed my cultivation all those years ago, and it includes some materials to refine swords. You can take them if you need them. Besides that, you ought to understand that when you fuse the bloodline of a divine beast into your origin sword, the more peaceful the bloodline of the divine beast is, the easier it is to fuse it, and vice versa. Amongst the various stages of cultivation in the Saint Realm, the Golden Core Realm is the most peaceful. In this realm, the power of the Golden Core Realm is as harmonious as one and is prepared for the creation of divine powers. If you can refine your natal holy sword as a Golden Core Realm cultivator, it will be much easier for you. Golden Core Realm. Sing Hui shook his head when he heard this. Too many resources are needed to form a golden core. Even inferior grade golden core requires a lot of resources, especially since I have a divine grade battle body and divine grade vital essence. Once I form a golden core, it will be a superior grade golden core. Correspondingly, I will need a lot of resources to form an inferior grade or superior grade golden core. Resources? Hidden Sword Venerable said with a faint smile. The Hidden Sword sect has ruled the Hidden Sword continent for thousands of years. Over the years, we have accumulated a lot of resources. In addition, 100 years ago, I planned to use my second golden core to carry my natal holy sword, so I deliberately collected resources to refine my golden core. Unfortunately, I later found out that the method to carry my natal holy sword with my second golden core was not usable, so I collected all these resources. Although these resources are not much, they are enough for you to form a superior grade golden core. Sing Hui was slightly stunned by Hidden Sword Venerable's words. The Hidden Sword sect was the supreme overlord of the Hidden Sword continent. The entire Hidden Sword continent was dominated by the Hidden Sword sect. As the strongest member of the Hidden Sword sect, if the Hidden Sword Venerable wanted to collect resources, the power that he could use was far beyond what ordinary people could compare to. Although it was difficult to accumulate resources for hundreds of years to condense a high-grade golden core, it was still barely possible. However, Sing Hui had inherited Hidden Sword Venerable's ultimate sword art. If he took these resources, he would not be able to accept them. Hidden Sword Venerable seemed to understand Sing Hui's thoughts. He pondered for a while and said, "These resources were gathered by the Hidden Sword sect after hundreds of years of hard work. If I just gave them to you, even as the founder of the Hidden Sword sect, I would feel sorry for the disciples of the Hidden Sword sect. How about this? I hope that you can become the supreme elder of the Hidden Sword sect. When you have enough power, you will be able to protect the Hidden Sword sect. Also, in the next 100 years, you will need to take in a disciple and teach him." As the supreme elder of the Hidden Sword sect, Sing Hui looked at Hidden Sword Venerable and said, "I don't think I will be staying in the Hidden Sword sect for long in the future. I understand. I just hope that when the Hidden Sword sect is in trouble and asks you for help, you will help the Hidden Sword sect. I promise." Sing Hui agreed. At the same time, he was confused. "Hidden Sword Venerable, you are about to switch to the way of the sword. When that time comes, you will be strong enough to dominate the Saint Realm. With your power, you will be able to protect the Hidden Sword sect." "Why?" Hidden Sword Venerable shook his head. "If I can cultivate my natal spiritual sword in 3 to 5 years and fuse it with my cultivation, I will be able to improve greatly." But the Hidden Sword Venerable's voice turned gloomy. "I'm too old. I'm 2,800 years old now. I've been through countless battles in my life. If I still had my golden core, I would have been able to survive for another 100 or 200 years. But now, I've already infused all of my cultivation into my natal divine sword. The only reason I'm still alive is because of the medicine I took earlier. But this won't last for too long. 40 years, 30 years, 20 years. I don't know. I have to leave a way out for the Hidden Sword sect. At the same time, I have to settle some grudges. Sing Hui looked at Hidden Sword Venerable. It was the first time he saw a cultivator facing the fate of dying of old age. At that moment, he did not know how to answer. Life and death is a constant. I have lived for so many years, I have seen through it. The Hidden Sword Venerable looked at Qing Su and smiled faintly. Your sword intent is very pure. If you want to maintain this purity, you need to have a clear mind. As a result, I'm not afraid of you going back on your word. Otherwise, your promise today will become a demon in your future, a shackle that will stop you from attaining great achievement in the way of the sword. To be honest, I'm lucky to have met a cultivator with pure sword intent like you in my limited time left. It'll truly allow me to pass on my way of the sword and the Hidden Sword sect without worry. Qing Su met the Hidden Sword Venerable's gentle gaze. Even though he knew what the Hidden Sword Venerable was scheming, he did not resent him at all. Instead, he promised seriously, "Don't worry, Hidden Sword Venerable. Unless I die, I'll definitely do everything I can to assist the Hidden Sword Venerable the moment I receive news that you're in trouble. I trust you." Hidden Sword Venerable nodded solemnly. Most of the time, when one understood the other party's sword will and knew what kind of person they were, one would be able to trust them unconditionally. For a swordsman, it was that simple. Come with me. I hope that the resources I have accumulated will be enough for you to form your golden core. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.